welcome. Today is Tuesday, September, believe it or not, the 1st, 2020. This is a Pickens County Board of County Commissioners work session. It's 1 o'clock and we are starting our regular agenda. I am in the office, as you can see, holding down the fort. I'm here with Rich Engelhardt, who's helping me hold down the fort. And we have staff for our technology and for grassroots. And on Zoom, we have Steve Child, Kelly McNicholas Curry, George Newman and Greg Poshman, and the county manager, John Peacock, and Phyllis Mattice. And we have a guest, Chris Lopez, who's going to be helping to present. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Patty. I stayed home today because I've had a bad sore throat and cold again and headache and shortness of breath, all the same symptoms I've been getting on and off for the last 6 months now. So I stayed at home to be exercise the most caution and hopefully not pass this on to anybody else. So first on our agenda this afternoon, we have the Phillips Mobile Home Park infrastructure funding, relocation process, and energy mineral impact assistance fund updates. And Phyllis, I'm going to hand this over to you to introduce, and I think probably our guest Chris Lopez will probably be doing a lot of the talking. So Phyllis, take it away.
Thank you. Phyllis Mattice, Deputy County Manager. Also on this item is John Ely, and we packaged as part of the operation, so I thought we'd have John's piece go first. It was the last memo in your packet, which has to do about the fishing easement. The rest of the information for today's discussion is related to funding that's available as we go through what's potentially needed at Phillips regarding infrastructure, roads, wastewater, drinking water. John was originally scheduled in this time slot, and then as we were moving Phillips along, things kind of changed, so we thought we'd still add John here, and that way if we get rid of the fishing access piece, which is John's concern and wanted some direction, then we'll move on to funding. Does that work for you, John and Chris? Okay, sure, John.
Yeah, so public use of public property. And I know you all prepare for your meetings pretty diligently, and so I know you've all read the few paragraphs I had to write. Do you care to give me any direction or ask any questions regarding the use of the Phillips property by members of the public?
Steve, I have a
go ahead, George.
Go ahead, Patty, if you have a question.
Yeah, I just have a comment. You know, I think the fact that this one gentleman has been informing the public that they don't have the right to use this public property, that needs to stop. And I think the signage that I would support is informing the public they're allowed to enter the property for fishing purposes, and just make that clear. It's a great spot. We want people to get out there and enjoy it, especially what's going on in the rest of the world right now. And I think being able to spread that out along the river frontage makes sense at this time. But it's not just for one person's private use. It's for the public on public land.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. As John, you opened it up with the issue is public use on public land, and that says it all. So we should sign it. It's open to the public, and let's move on to the next topic.
Thank you, George.
Kelly.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners. The question I have for John Ely is, is the sign being contemplated anything special to this property, or would it reflect just the same type of sign we use to indicate any other fishing easement in the county, which I'll just say my preference would be the latter, simply because there's continuity for people who already understand where they can access the river and this would just continue to that on this specific piece of land.
Well, that seems logical to me too, but whatever the direction of the board is, we can do. We can set it up whatever the preference is, or if you just want staff to deal with it, it will be signed consistent with other fishing access properties, fishing easements, and so forth like that.
George?
Yeah, I mean, part of the, at least historically, many of our fishing easements, signages are open space because they come through open space conservation easements. And so at this point, this is not part of the Open Space and Trails program, so we probably wouldn't want to use a similar sign that we're showing throughout most of the county.
No, we could have the same text though, so that the text is consistent. It would just have the Pickens County logo on the sign as opposed to OST.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Wait, Steve, a quick clarification. I thought we were changing our signage for open space fishing easements to recreation easements. So we want to do the same thing here so that people don't get in trouble if they're down there and don't have a fishing pole in their hand. Yeah, we just changed that on some of our fishing easements.
I would agree with that, Patty. One more thought. If this is not sufficient, I think we should be prepared to put, do a news story about this in the paper, or take legal action if the measures we're taking now aren't enough. I would think, a cease and desist order if this situation keeps going on, in spite of us posting the property that it's open to the public. We need to be prepared to take some further action going into the future, but we want to start on this easy end. I understand that, and I agree with that. Greg?
I just want to make sure I understand this. I think the individual in question has since passed away, right? And so is it just his company or his heir, or something doesn't seem right reading this? I'm thinking of the individual who started the company, John Hollinger, correct? Who I believe had passed away a year or so ago, and so I'm just wondering who's actually going and telling people to leave the property.
Well, I didn't know that, but I do know what's being relayed back up to me is through the company.
The guy from the company.
Yeah.
Okay, just to be clear, yeah. So somebody at the company, and perhaps it's his son, who now runs the business at the Woody Creek by the tavern. And
Yeah, that's Aspen Outfitting.
But it sounds like maybe there's just a communication problem. Somebody didn't get the memo that they don't have the access any longer. Just wondering if there's a snafu there that we don't know about.
Maybe, although that's somewhat hard to imagine, to be honest with you. And that's why I thought the signage would work. That way everybody who is physically present on the property would know what their scope of use is. They can expand it for recreational purposes or contract it to fishing, but we'll expand it to recreational purposes. And that way there should be no conflicts down there.
Right. Okay. Maybe I don't know if letters have been sent to the company and to the son or heir of the company, so they understand our position on this.
I would assume so. There's plenty of communication, that's for sure. Okay. But it's like Steve said, if the situation persists, then I'll be back to talk to you again about next potential steps.
Okay, thank you, John, for, I think we're all pretty familiar with this by now, but it sounds like a good
All right.
next step forward, and hopefully this one will work, and we won't have a problem going into the future.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, John. So back
Thanks,
to
John.
you, Phyllis, for
Okay.
the discussion on the findings.
Well, the rest of your packet is quite detailed. Chris did a great job summarizing all the different fundings that are available, as well as the relocation piece, which is what we're also looking for some direction today, in that we have a couple of owners of units who are on the Riverview side that are interested in leaving and wanted to know about selling their units. And when we started to get into the relocation process, there's an advantage if the county purchased them and makes for the process that we have to follow a lot easier. So I'm going to let Chris go through some of this. Awesome job on the memo, Chris. I understood it all, so I really appreciate that, because sometimes it's pretty detailed. So I'll let you go ahead and do the overall summary. There is some dollars that are identified here, which, as we're going into budget process, I would need to make sure that those are covered. So this is great timing. Just one more thing. In the memo, it talks about 59 units. Last week we were at 60 units. So as we were preparing memos and crossing weeks, we're close, but that's why some of those details are just missing a little. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, great. Hey, thanks for having me. Commissioners, I assume you can hear me all right. And so, yeah, appreciate being here. You know, I'm part of the team here with DHM, and I actually worked with Project Moxie with my wife, Jennifer. But yeah, part of the team, and have been working mostly on the infrastructure and relocation piece. And yeah, thanks, Phyllis, for saying you could understand that, because it is a lot of information and a lot of detail. And I have a lot of other backup documentation should it be needed or requested. So we can definitely provide other information. We tried to boil it down as simple as possible. So is it possible to share my screen? I did do a PowerPoint slide to hopefully make it a little easier to run through. Let me try that.
It is, Chris. Here. You should see a green share screen. You got it.
Okay. Did that work?
Yeah.
Okay, now let me, okay. And then I just gotta do this as a slideshow, right? Looks like. Is that showing as a slideshow to you all? Just as the one slide? Okay, cool. So, I also apologize about the memo. Let's see, does this, okay. So, you know, when I originally wrote the memo, we were looking for, I guess, I stated maybe decision. So knowing that this is a work session, it's direction. So we're requesting direction. I've changed some of the language in the slide to request direction, not decision. So apologize for not knowing the process either. But essentially, I want to provide you some updated information for the cost and replacing and upgrading of the existing infrastructure. Request direction for pursuing a federal USDA loan grant application for specifically the water and wastewater infrastructure, and that includes some of those budget expenses Phyllis mentioned. Provide updated information as well on the relocation regulations and guidelines. Request direction to formalize an acquisition process for the 2 units, or for units in general in the floodplain and debris flow, 2 that are more immediate than others, and then again pursue the development and implementation of a actual formal relocation plan for the park. Request direction to pursue funding we've identified through Department of Homeland Security Emergency Management that may be available to assist with some of these relocation expenses. And lastly, request direction to pursue the DOLA grant application due by October 1st to assist with some of these project management costs. So infrastructure estimates, like Phyllis said, the 59 units. So the 59 is what SGM Engineering, who's been working on this, had earlier this year. So again, the 5960, that number can easily be changed. I just wanted to make sure, you know, that what SGM had provided was at least at the 59. We recognize it's the 60 units is what's being discussed right now. And that really doesn't change the overall cost because the base infrastructure's been included in this. So as of June 24th, the estimate of probable cost for all of these items, and in your memo it had it broken down a lot more detailed. General construction, $416,000. Access roads, just over $400,000. The dry utilities, again, that's where, you know, some of these individual costs would go up depending on the number of units, but really they're more minimal, about $615,000. And then the wastewater treatment at about $2.5 million, and the water distribution and storage at $900,000. So total, you're looking at close to $4.9 million, at least based on SGM's estimates, to upgrade the Phillips Park for all of the existing units and including the new units on the hillside. At one point in time, you know, we did just run a real high number. I know it was actually came up in the last meeting as well in terms of what's this cost per unit. I mean, this is a back of the napkin type calculation, but essentially, if, you know, going with the 59 units that SGM had, you know, you're looking at about $82,500 per unit to help assist them with these costs. And if you use the USDA 40-year loan product, which right now their rates are 1.875%, you know, that comes down to about $250 a month. Again, I'm not a finance person, but these are just some rough numbers so you can kind of see what we're talking per unit cost.
So Kelly has a question, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, my question, I have 3 questions, but all related to this, and I guess proceeding, also expecting the grant conversation too. So do we know, with regards to the dry utilities, is there any significant cost differential if we were to say, talk about broadband, you know, fiber installation, or if we were to look at, you know, solar panel utilities and forego gas, or something along those lines for the new units? Obviously, I assume that some of these hookups for the current units will remain what they are, but have to be replaced. Has that been discussed? And then would those type of changes be precluded in any of the grant applications?
So I kind of came in a little late, so I know SGM has done a lot of work since last February, right, Phyllis? I mean, they've been looking at this several different times. I know that they've included some costs for the solar garden and other amenities. When it comes specifically to the installation of the dry utilities, I'm not quite as familiar with that. I think you're right, though. Like, they have this is real base infrastructure to support the total, call it 60 units. Specific to solar, though, versus the natural gas lines that may already be in the area, I'm not quite as familiar about that. Phyllis, are you?
Where'd Phil
Kelly?
Kelly was helping me mute or unmute, whichever way I'm
Okay.
going. When we were at Basalt Vista, when we made the last minute decision to not put the gas lines in, I think it was only about a $25,000 savings to not put gas lines in. So electric, it's typically trenched and they're all in there together, so you're not really getting the material saving. So that's, when we're looking at ballpark figures, I think it'll still be close if we make those kind of minor changes.
And I'd agree with that. And, you know, your other comments were a good question. And so, you know, we are just in initial conversations with these funding sources. But, yeah, these are things that can definitely be changed throughout the application and grant funding loan request process. So, yeah, you don't obviously want to get as close to your final product as possible, but things will change. And that's definitely possible with these funding sources identified as well.
So Chris, there's something on the slide that to me is kind of misleading. It gives the cost per unit over 82,000 per unit. sort of implying, and then it tells how this would be paid for over a 40-year period and on a loan. But then we're applying for grants and all these different ways we're trying to fund this, that we're not actually anticipating that each unit is going to have to pay $82,000 on this thing over time. Some of it would be loans probably that would have to be repaid, but the final figure is going to be, something way less than the $82,000 per unit, hopefully. Greg?
A couple of things. One, I appreciate Kelly's comment just regarding what utilities we're running, and it's good to know that the gas isn't that significant, but as in all of our conversations about decarbonizing, all the advice we're getting is you really go electric, let's cut the gas out. I did want to ask about the phone as well. A lot of people don't even have landlines any longer, and it doesn't sound like running the phone line is going to be a substantial amount of money. But I think just maybe from a philosophical standpoint, we should consider not having the phone and gas lines, or at least not planning on hooking them up. The other topic, just regarding the finance again, also I noticed that the cost of ownership, as Steve points out, isn't quite accurate, only in that there's no reflection of land costs at all in there and what the acquisition cost of the property was. And I don't know if we're going to look at the actual cost of each unit. We're also looking at 59 as opposed to what's existing there now. So it's kind of an abstract number, but I think the abstract number should also just include the actual cost per unit, so we all have a reality check there. And maybe it does, and I don't see it, but I don't think we have land costs at all in here.
No.
I think that, Greg, goes with last week's conversation about parcels. So it's not appropriate to put the full cost of the parcel, the 70 acres, 65, 70 acres as a cost. So we'd have to figure out what that is. But there is a cost there. You're absolutely right.
Point taken, thank you.
This is just the infrastructure estimates.
Okay.
Steve?
Correct. These are, go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Patty?
Yeah, I think what we did at Basalt Vista was great, having it electrified. But, we have to talk about the new units with the solar farm, so they'd have their power source there. And I don't have a problem making those units all electric. But we would have to put in the infrastructure to make the old units electric as they upgraded, because then people would have to replace their water heaters and their, all of their, most of their appliances and everything to go all electric. So that would be another hit. But I think we should plan ahead and make sure we're looking at the infrastructure to hook the old units up to all electric as they move into, new units, etc. So I think that would be a great idea. The other thing too, as far as phone, Greg's right, most people don't have landlines, except some people need them for in cases of emergency when we don't have cell connection, and some people need them for certain types of medical equipment. You have to have a landline. So we need to be taking that into consideration, just to see what the need is. That would be a good question for the tenants, to see what people actually do use the landline. So I think, in the 82,000, I think that takes in if it's all alone. And I think that best case scenario is apply for whatever we can apply for out there, grants, loans, partial grant, partial loans, from anybody and everybody we can think of. Just get those applications out, see where it goes to help buy down that cost for the people that live there with grants. And because that's kind of, I think, what our plan was, to see what monies we could find at the state, local, and federal levels. So I think we're off to a good start on that.
So I have one more wrinkle to add to this, talking about the landline phones. If we're digging trenches and laying conduit and things, we might want to consider pre-wiring this for fiber optic, because this could be in a total shadow for the county broadband. They can't see the top of Williams Hill from there, for instance, and putting in fiber optic cable at this, when we have everything dug up, might be a wise thing to do. I have no idea of the cost of it, but would be similar to the phone, putting in a phone line.
See if I could follow up on that. I think, yeah, having the conduit there so it could be plumbed would make a lot of sense. And I agree, I like redundancy. I've got the first guy to like redundancy regarding energy sources. I do, whenever anybody talks about relocating older buildings, it does make me nervous though, if we're trying to push toward energy efficiency. So to put in gas lines to accommodate buildings we're moving when perhaps down the road it'd be better to replace them. I still love to see the numbers on that, but we're straying away from it here. So I just wanted to register that comment to back up what Patty was saying.
Yeah, I'll just say these are all great comments. They're, I mean, again, really good details. And so this is really just sort of initial numbers. I mean, these numbers have been worked on, you know, very extensively by SGM, but these are, again, are just very initial. And once we were to dig into the details and start formally pursuing funding sources, yeah, there would be quite a few more meetings and a lot more details and reports generated with a lot more specifics. So I think those are all great points, though. And I just wanted to, based on the overall infrastructure, at least say, yeah, right now, I mean, it's not an insignificant cost to each unit, just assuming the worst case scenario, which obviously I think that number would come way down, but just something to at least a starting point for discussion, right? So I'll go to the next slide then. So, you know, really what we've been looking at specifically is funding or funding sources for water and wastewater specifically, because those are the funding sources that are out there. So combined for just to do based on SGM's estimates, you know, you're looking at $3.8 million right now for those two. And the two primary funding strategies that are primarily used by local governments are the State Revolving Loan Fund. Again, these are a lot of acronyms here, so I won't get into all of them, but, you know, it's managed by the Power Development Authority. They're basically a partnership of DOLA, CDPHE, and the Colorado Water Resources Power Development Authority. We've had very good initial conversations with them. And again, these are low interest loan products for disadvantaged communities, which, you know, obviously Phillips, we would have to do some reports demonstrating Phillips specifically as a disadvantaged community, separate from Pitkin County. You know, you have to meet certain criteria, but that we would have the ability to do that. USDA Rural Development is probably the really big one that most local governments use. It's a combination loan and grant program. Long-term loan, 40 years, like I said, low interest, lowest, talking with the regional representative, the market rate is the lowest he's ever seen it in the 15, 20 years he's been with USDA. And then they basically have the caveat that if funds are available, they do combine that with grant funding as well. So, they, you know, depending on availability of that grant funding. Another question that had come up last week, which is what SGM did design for. So I wanted to, you know, make the statement here that SGM did, the estimates they provided are for what they called a modular step wastewater system. So essentially you can allow these steps in the future. You can, each step serves 10 units. So right now there are currently 6 steps that have been put in the current plan, but you can add these 10 unit steps in the future should additional units want to be added. So that's at least the system that they were looking at and provided costs for.
Can I ask a question about that? So just regarding a modular system like that, does that come at a much higher price tag to install something like that? Or we're designing it with some flexibility, but there's a cost with that, as opposed to something that's just designed for what we have planned for now?
My understanding from conversations with SGM is no, not necessarily, and that this type's of system, and this is a system that would be approved because obviously we are very close to the river corridor here. So this is also a system that is allowed by these agencies, you know, and preferred versus other types of, like you're talking maybe the pond systems or something. So, but real basic conversations with SGM, no, this doesn't cost much more, and it is a system that would be approved, in other words. And so I just wanted to show again, you know, based on that last site plan you all saw last week, you know, so I show, you know, you can see where that wastewater would be going near the ranch house there, just below the ranch house in that field is where they currently propose to put that. And that allows for expansion in the future should that be necessary. And then, you know, there's a lot of conversation about that middle basin, but that at least currently is where they were showing where they would have a water storage tank added for drinking water supply and fire supply. I should mention the water supply does also include fire mitigation as well. Okay, so just to dig in a little bit details on each of these different funding sources. So for the state revolving loan fund, again, we have confirmed Phillips' eligibility for this funding, and as part of that, we were required to submit some paperwork earlier this summer that was outlined in the memo, these eligibility surveys. So we did submit those, and they were approved. So it's actually, they're called, there's two separate lists. There's a drinking water list and a water pollution control list. The actual eligibility list will be released in January of 2021. Assuming Pitkin County is on those lists, then that will basically allow Pitkin County to pursue funding through those agencies. And then it's about a 1 year to 18-month long estimated process from initiating an application with them. And there's basically the 4 phases of the planning, the design, the approval, and then the financing and the loan closing. So just to give you a sense, you know, none of this is, this particular route, you wouldn't initiate applications till next year, early in the year maybe, and it would probably take the full year before you'd actually close on any type of loan product.
Would you mind showing us the graphic, the map once again, just the locations? Now, just one. Is this the existing? Is that the
yes.
E? Is that? Yeah.
That's for easement. Yes, and this is the one that was presented last week. I did exclude the additional units, you know, going to the south by the solar array. I just used the one that shows the 60 total units.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So with USDA Rural Development, you know, we've done a lot of research around that program. Again, confirmed eligibility. We've talked with the regional representative, Dwayne Daves. He's actually out of Cortez, but covers that area. Yeah, he, you know, basically we've all verified that yes, Phillips would meet the criteria for this. Their application process is a rolling application. There's no necessarily hard dates or deadlines. It starts their fiscal year, which is October 1st, and basically runs through September 30th for their fiscal year. You know, part of this conversations with both the state and with USDA, you know, they're aware of obviously Lazy Glen and Aspen Village. So I did speak with both Karen Hillebrand, I believe is her name, at Lazy Glen, and I also spoke with the Romero Group and a couple individuals with Aspen Village. So Lazy Glen actually just closed earlier this summer on their wastewater loan grant combination with USDA. So they are moving forward. They got the funding, did the application, and signed the paperwork, and so they are moving forward on upgrading their wastewater system with this same program. Aspen Village has been working with USDA for at least the last year, if not longer. their application's kind of been put on hold and is still pending. They're working through, you know, other issues. Sounds like there's several of them within the Aspen Village, but the idea is they want us to at least consider regionalization is the word and the term they used of a system. And so, you know, we've at least had conversations about that for SGM, or to do a cost estimate to regionalize a system, for example, combine Aspen Village and Phillips. I mean, that would be a significant amount of time and money to be spent on looking at that type of a system, which is very different than what SGM has done so far. So at this point, we haven't obviously pursued any of that, and it does seem it would be challenging given that both parks are on opposite sides of the Roaring Fork, and they're about 1.5 miles away from each other as the crow flies, it seems. So I don't know if there's any questions or conversation around the Lazy Glen and Aspen Village. So, okay, we've just, for this purposes, we've had conversations, but are just focusing on Phillips. So the big thing of the USDA application is that a preliminary engineering report and an environmental assessment or environmental report, depending on what's kind of needed, are two reports that need to be generated prior to actually formally submitting an application. These upfront costs that the county would have to incur are reimbursable, as should a loan be closed upon. So although they are upfront costs, the cost for these reports can be included in the final loan product and being reimbursed. We've estimated those to be at about $75,000. That's just based on conversations with SGM and previous experience with EAs. So that would be for both reports, you know, a total combined cost of around $75,000. The thing is what would have to occur next for this is a request for qualifications be published for 30 days. There's criteria and guidelines, but essentially you have to show a competitive process, publish this request for qualifications for firms to respond to, and then the county would select the firm that they wanted to go with. So, you know, SGM obviously would be very interested in submitting to that because they've been working on this but that is a requirement of the USDA funding. And then these reports, these same two reports, should also applications be pursued with the state revolving loan fund, they basically can be used because they're going to require the same reports. They have a different name for them, but these two reports can also be used for that same application packet. Any questions there? So really the direction we're looking for today then is to go ahead and for the team to continue to pursue the low interest grant loan application with USDA, and we would be available to assist with that RFQ process for the preliminary engineering report and environmental reports. Like I said, in the time frame, you know, if you were to publish that RFQ request for qualifications in September for 30 days, you know, you're looking at probably October, you know, having another meeting and looking at selecting a firm, which would maybe get started sometime in November. And then depending on the firm, you know, the turnaround time. You know, if it's a brand new firm, it's probably going to take them a little while. And if it was SGM, for example, it'd probably be a little faster. I had something else on that. Some of these firms provide both services, though. You know, I do know some firms do both the environmental side as well, but it also might be an environmental, you know, a separate environmental firm for that report too. And at that point, we would really, you know, if this was the direction that the commissioners wanted to take, we would obviously work very closely with the USDA regional representative and start digging into more of those details, like questions you were asking earlier about the solar array and other power sources. So that's the direction we're asking for, and then a decision would need to be made regarding the financing for that estimated preliminary reimbursable costs, which about $75,000. So whether it would be a supplement to the 2020 budget or you would include it in your 2021 budget.
Kelly?
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. This I appreciate the presentation because it clarified some questions I had from the memo. I do have a question. Is it possible to leverage either of these grants as the match for the other grants?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think that's a really good question. So I can ask that of the representatives. That's a great question. And I will mention that there is, I had it in the slide, and I think I had it in the memo about the RCAC, the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. They have a lot of free technical services too. I just didn't, the slides this was a lot of information I recognize for you all. So we will continue conversations with RCAC though as well, because they do have some free technical services to provide as part of these applications, and they have worked with both USDA and the state revolving loan funds, and both have been used in combination. Rarely, I think he said there's 1 or 2 projects in Colorado, but they're pushing to use both products. So I think that's a great question, Kelly, and I'll follow up on that.
Thank you. And then my second question is, we have the good estimate with regards to the $4.8 million in cost. Do both of these grant opportunities, are those buckets big enough to help us cover all of that? Or with the exception of our match requirements, or are we talking about $200,000, or are we talking about $2 million?
Yeah, no, they definitely have the funding, and it would actually just, it would be the 3.8. So this would just be specific to the water and the wastewater.
Yeah,
so,
oh, right, thank you.
Yep, so it's just specific to those, and yes, definitely would cover all of that.
Okay,
Both,
thank you.
either individually or combined.
Thank you.
Steve, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, this is more for staff. Thanks, Chris, for this information. We're getting there. We got a ways to go, but we're getting there step by step. Where would this money, I'm going to look over here at my friend sitting over there, hoping I'm not going to ask him this question. Where are we looking at taking these funds for in the interim until such time as we know they're reimbursable, we've got the money to be reimbursed, or we might not get the grant or the loan and they're not going to be reimbursable then? Is it coming, do we still have money in our housing fund, or is it coming out of our all too familiar general fund, or what bucket?
Well, is that
Patty?
looks like Phyllis maybe can address that.
Yeah, I got it. These improvements on the property are eligible for the housing impact fee funds. Last year, I believe we took in about $500,000 of impact fees. I don't have the updates now. When we figure out, are we supplementing the 2020, is there money in there now, or do we wait for more revenues? We'll have to figure that out. So it is appropriate on the infrastructure development to be able to use those fees.
I just wasn't
So that's
sure.
what-
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we'd already drained that bucket or we're filling it back up. So it's nice to hear we have some money there that can be used appropriately for this, and until we get those big grants and loans, and we can pay ourselves back and use it for another project out there. All right, thanks, Phyllis.
We're slowly filling it back up, but I will be getting with Connie and figuring out if we have enough to float all of this.
Okay, great, thank you.
So are there any further questions? I think we could do a thumbs up on pursuing the USDA grant loan application and the RFQ process for the engineering report and the EAR. These acronyms, I don't know what they all mean quite yet.
I missed, that's actually ER, but, and just so you are, I think that's important to state, the RFQ process does not commit you to those fundings. Again, we're just soliciting for qualifications from qualified contractors. So by doing the RFQ process, you haven't committed yourself to spending those monies or necessarily contracting with those folks.
You know, obviously, and giving our thumbs up isn't obligating us to the USDA grant, but it's have you be pursuing it, and then if we, at some point in the time in the future, we would vote on that in a regular, one of our regular meetings. So everybody want to give a thumbs up on just giving them direct to pursue these things?
I'm okay giving staff direction to start pursuing grants and funds and loans.
As am I.
And then the part of the financing part for the $75,000, I mean, I think either way, whatever way that the staff figures out we need to do that is how we would do it. And we don't, I mean, obviously Connie would be our financial person who can figure those things out, the best way to do that. So I don't think we need to decide on that. We need to hear from Connie and Phyllis on the best way to pursue that. But I think that should be the direction we go. Is everybody okay with that? Maybe do a thumbs up on that too.
I'm not sure what, well, I thought we did move forward on that.
Yeah, and hopefully I didn't make it any confusion, because I definitely, Bob Schultz helped me yesterday understand the work sessions versus the formal session. So, you know, I just wanted to ensure that you all were aware of the budget numbers and how you know, when and how you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. We know this is going to cost money and we have to pay for it somehow. And this is like trying to figure out the best way to be paying for it.
Yeah.
So then, moving on, Phyllis, we have the questions about the relocation and whatnot. Let's start into that.
Okay. So relocation. So, you know, a lot of these funding sources, specifically these infrastructure sources, as well as potential sources for the affordable housing in the future, you know, maybe for some of those new units you're considering, they all do require that the Uniform Relocation and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act, or easily say URA, must be followed. So the most immediate, really the big, where this comes into play is on those 9 existing units that need to be, you know, I use the word removed and or relocated. I know they're all in kind of different states of disrepair and or repair. So, but there are 9 units that will need to be removed or relocated due to the fact that they're in the Roaring Fork floodplain, you know, on the Riverview side, or as was identified through the debris flow study, that there's potentially two units in the hillside area that are also in that debris flow that would need to be removed or relocated. And so I just want to be very clear that obviously the URA does not apply to the project today because, you know, it will not become relevant until an application for federal assistance has formally been submitted. So although it does not apply today, we have been working with a group out of Denver, HCPEC, that's expert in relocation regulation. So they've been helping us provide with some guidance, some sample documents, and then more recently this outline kind of for an acquisition process that would comply with URA regulations, even though we don't necessarily, county doesn't have to follow them today. And we have tons and tons of background information should you want it about the actual regulation itself and all these other things. So I had a lot of that originally in the memo and it was too overwhelming, but obviously happy to provide any of the backup documentation whenever you all would want to see some of the details of that. So really the voluntary acquisition, I think, is at the forefront of relocation right now, specifically because it sounds like Phyllis, at least 2 units so far have kind of come forward stating, you know, that they are voluntarily planning to leave the park. Doesn't sound to me like it has anything to do necessarily with the redevelopment of the park, but that they may be planning to leave on their own accord. But what the possibility would be if the county would be interested in acquiring their units. Maybe I'll have you speak a little bit about that, Phyllis, as well, and then I could go over the actual process for that or the guidelines.
Sure. One person has been looking for a while to leave and called me and said, you know, I talked to a realtor, how do I sell my place? Who can I sell it to? And right now, the only requirements for people purchasing units is that they work the 1,500 hours in Pickens County, they don't own any property in the exclusionary zone of APSHA, and they live in that's their primary residence. So APSHA, we've had one sale since we bought it on the riverside, the other side, the hillside. But when this person asked me about the Riverview, it just raised, what process should we have if we have to relocate it? And when we started looking at these funding sources where you have to have these URA requirements to be able to be eligible, or if you get that funding, you have to adhere to these URA guidelines, what would that look like? We did have one tenant leave one of our cabins, and we didn't fill that. Now, even people who are renting cabins are eligible for relocation assistance through this program. So it's complex. So as we started looking into this, we had asked Chris, what would it look like? What kind of purchase process would we have to go through to do this, to be able to advance purchasing one? And then when we talk about, from last week, how many units do we have to replace, that takes those units totally out of the equation for us. We can create anything we want to create. We don't have to replace a unit for someone if we've already voluntarily acquired them from that person. So I think that's kind of the summary. And then we heard of another one up for sale, and Bob Schultz believes if we created some kind of a process, there may be others that would be willing to just, somebody wanted to go to Arkansas to be with their family and they're getting older. And so the stories are interesting. It's just people's lives. And I don't know sometimes what COVID prompts people to make changes. So I think that's it for me, Chris.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's very complex, the relocation stuff, and that's why we do have another consulting firm assisting us understand all this, because, you know, whether you're an owner or a tenant, you know, at the end of the day, essentially, you just can't kick somebody out. If you have federal funding tied to your project, you can't just move them out. You have to provide them basically safe, sanitary, comparable, decent housing. So that's the really high level umbrella of this. And so if some of these folks are looking to leave and the county were to acquire those units, you know, that removes that out. You've followed the URA process for acquisition, and then, you know, as long as I'll get into it. So I guess I'll get into that a little bit, the voluntary acquisition. If somebody wants to just say, yeah, I'm just moving, not because of your project, you know, we would want to understand their timeline for moving, you know, especially more specifically for these two as well. You know, we're looking at these as maybe some test cases as well for the future. We'd want to have a good process in place, and then test it with these folks. What's their timeline for moving, and really being clear on what the property status is, real versus personal. The big one is obtaining these market value appraisals. That could potentially, with mobile homes, include an income as well, like how much income would these people be able to get if they continue to rent their property, for example. But, you know, we'd work through that appraisal of these units. There is an actual form that complies with the URA and HUD guidelines that I think I attached in your memo. So we would use that as a guide. You know, we could tweak it here and there, but essentially, once an appraisal came up with, you could use that guide form to negotiate what they call like an arm's length acquisition from these owners. And so assuming that they agree to the price, then essentially relocation, if they, you know, they were to say, well, now you need to pay for me to relocate because your project's moving me out of this place. Well, you've avoided those through the acquisition process. So, assuming you acquire it, what do you do next? Well, you definitely don't want to rent it prior to a federal funding application, because now you've got a tenant that will be able to receive relocation assistance. It could be rented after the submittal of an application, though, without a relocation expense. There's just certain notifications that would go along with that to that tenant, but you could do that. And then depending on the condition of these units, obviously, I mean, I think a lot of them are older. You may end up having to potentially pay the costs to dispose of those if it's been determined to, really be uninhabitable or undesirable, or it's not able to be relocated to the other side of the river, to the swamp. So I'll see if there's any other questions about that right now. I know it's a lot of information.
Okay, George?
Hey, I've got a couple of questions on that. I guess start with your last comment, Chris, that depending on some of these, I don't know, are there any of these that are looking at selling, are they trailers that are pre-HUD that maybe we never quite got an answer, I don't think, Phyllis, whether we're able to actually move one of those or not?
One is pre-HUD, one is post, of the two that I'm aware of. Of the 6 trailers that are on the Riverview side, 2 are post-HUD, 6 or 4 are pre-HUD, and then there's the cabin that's owned by an individual.
So then what happens with the pre-HUD? I mean, who's responsible for basically disposing of that, correct?
If we're purchasing it, so I talked with Kathy Hall about the trailer units that come to the landfill. The older ones need to be evaluated for asbestos. It's probably the biggest expense with pre-HUDs, but it's a pretty reasonable fee when you're talking disposal of them. The evaluation that Bob Schultz had done on some of these units, there was a determination that some definitely couldn't, but a lot of the pre-HUDs, maybe 55, 60% of them, he thought was worth a try to move them. There's one that has pillars in it and are really being held up, probably wouldn't be able to be moved, but they can be moved as long as they're being moved on the same property. So someone couldn't sell a pre-HUD unit and move it to Basalt, but they could move it to within the same boundaries of our property. So we've solved that one a while ago.
So then, let me just follow up on that. So then, if we have a designated spaces for relocations, then it would be up to the responsibility of that owner to relocate those units at their own cost. I guess I'm trying to understand why we would want to purchase these units. Maybe it's similar to the example of the frying pan mobile home, where the town of Basalt just decided to pay each owner and to help them with the relocation costs.
Well, I'm going to guess because of the relocation guidelines, we would be incurring the expense to move the trailer. So that's going to be the expense that we have versus, so if we purchase it, we don't have to move it. We can, if it's not movable, we don't have to risk it. Or we could risk moving it and maybe going to one of Greg's point, if it's not an energy efficient unit and people are spending a lot of money heating something, that might be better with a new unit. And maybe it's something that the county buys and rents. We have a lot of variety of options once we get that far down the line.
Yeah, it just seems that I guess I'm still don't quite understand the true benefit for the county. We have to look at the numbers. Why would we be purchasing them versus letting the owners just try to sell them or relocate them themselves if they can? So I'm still sort of stuck on that. Because otherwise, basically, we're just paying the owner, and we're just going to scrape the units anyway to save us some relocation costs, it sounds like.
Yeah, I might just add, I think part of the issue too is the fact that the redevelopment of the site, again, assuming you pursue federal funding to assist with the redevelopment of the site, that redevelopment currently says these people need to move. Like the county, in other words, is the owner of the property is saying you can't be here anymore because of floodplain concerns or debris flow. So that's what's kicking in. Then now it's the responsibility of the property owner to incur those costs because of if these people didn't have to move, if they could stay in Riverview, it's really a non-issue, obviously, right? But because the county's saying and there is the condemnation, path as well. It was the eminent domain, I guess, given the floodplain. I know that's not something that's really been talked about or concerned. I know that's just another angle, though, on this, too. It depends on, if FEMA were to come in and say, yeah, we've changed our floodplain maps, you need to get out of there. Interesting, looking at the floodplain maps, they're not all necessarily right in that new floodplain, but they're right there, obviously. Some of the units are physically in it, but looking at the hard line, it's kind of right there.
All right, thanks.
And I think, George, if we weren't going to apply for federal funding, as you outlined it, it would be the owner's responsibility. We'd have no responsibility in it at all. But if we want to apply for these funds, this is the strings that are attached to asking for those funds.
And what happens, that's assuming we get the funds. What happens if we don't get the funds? Are we still liable because we started that process?
Once you've submitted for an application, really what the URA ultimately is a CYA for the county, showing that way you followed a process, you followed these requirements and guidelines in folks that will need to be moved, even if it's on site. That way these people can't come back to the county and sue you for not having, for have forced them out without providing an alternative for them, a safe, sanitary, decent housing like that. So it's a lot of this relocation also is just a CYA for the county to prevent, people coming back at you. And not knowing where Habitat would get their monies, assuming it's Habitat or somebody else, if home funds are applied for or other funding in the future, even if the infrastructure funding isn't applied for, that would kick this requirement in as well.
And again, Phyllis, I guess we have to sort of look at the appraisal costs of these units. Some may be probably not even ability to appraise them. But I go back to that frying pan mobile home park example, as you recall, where the town of Basalt basically just paid each resident a certain amount of dollars to help them with their relocation. They didn't actually, I don't know if they ended up buying the units or just trashing those trailers, but they came up with a dollar amount for relocation aid.
Right. We can do some research into how that was figured out there at the Basalt Park.
Okay, Kelly?
Thanks. Yeah. I do just want to acknowledge that our intent in this project, we're not looking to have a higher or better use on the riverside. It is with a commitment to safe, sanitary housing towards people. So I don't think the federal requirements deviate from what our values are in this project either. I guess I'm still a little unclear. We want to go after this funding. We know we can't do it without other funding. And this path forward, to me, makes total sense. So we've since, committed to following the URA guidelines in earlier work sessions. I just want to understand, so that means for sure we will be on the hook for some cost, is what I'm hearing. And I guess I would like to understand, like George, what cost, just so we are clear-eyed about that. And are these units that we would choose or advise to repurpose anyway? Whether that, I think there's a short-term repurpose and there's long-term repurpose. Are these units at a quality of sanitary and safe housing that we would say these are good for long-term purpose and use, or maybe these are just good for short-term use? Because I think that would determine what we would ultimately do with them. Maybe one unit can be moved across and put on one of the slabs that we've designed into the hillside project, and maybe one isn't, but we feel comfortable enough renting it out for the duration, because we're obviously talking about many, many months before new units are constructed. So those are questions that I have about this, but otherwise I feel like we should commit to following the URA guidelines in pursuing this, and think about it through that lens rather than the lens of, well, what would we do if we didn't pursue those? I think we should just take that off the table, because we know we need to apply for this funding to make this project work as a whole.
And Chris, if I have it right, we're looking to create a acquisition process. We would come back to the board and tell you, here's the step-by-step. We'll be using a consultant. And I do think that there may be one unit that's a test case that's not in great shape, that maybe isn't a lot of fun to see, but whatever we create, we have to be able to replicate it for everyone equitably. And so that's really what we're trying to come up with. Whatever we decide to try, it has to be for the long haul, because we want to be able to do it the same for everybody.
Yeah, exactly right. So I went ahead and I did break up these slides. So there's a little bit more information. I think, the voluntary acquisition being the first piece and hairy piece. So I think, what we're looking for today, I really appreciate that, Commissioner, about the, you're committed to following this with or without really the federal funding. That's what I've been hearing all along since I've been involved in your project. So I guess what we're looking for then for this specific piece would be, again, directing us to go ahead and develop this process for voluntary acquisition per the URA guidelines. We would definitely, I would want review from John Ely in this, and involve your staff as much as possible, ensure that, that this process is tight. Everybody's reviewed it. So develop that process, and then once feeling good about that, obtaining those market value appraisals for one and or both of those Riverside units to at least start initiating that acquisition negotiation. That was at least where I landed here.
Well, I'll just ask for a point of clarification. Would that market value appraisal, I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume, that would include the question of whether it's movable or not?
We would want that for sure, I would think, yes.
Yeah.
George?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really difficult to get an appraisal for a unit that is that we designated in the flood zone, so we wouldn't allow any building that really does not have or will not have access to water or septic. I guess you could. I could ask someone I know how this person might think about appraising it, but I think it's going to be really difficult, and I think that probably comes back to Basalt again. They probably just came up with a number because most of those trailers were pre-HUD anyway, so they couldn't really be relocated to another space. So they just came up with a number, and appraisal really wasn't that pertinent. But I guess it's a starting point. But I just see. I'm questioning the value of an appraisal for a property that's in a flood zone without water, without septic, without the ability to build on it.
Well, George, what happened in some of the other parks is people bought in, actually businesses even bought in, because you were able to be grandfathered into space when the rest of the place was developed. So someone might buy a unit knowing they're gonna trash it anyway, but now I have dibs on one of those 9, 10 lots that are already built on the other side, and that's what they're purchasing. They're not necessarily purchasing the unit. The unit may only sell for $30,000. And for that, they have a site confirmed at Phillips that they may buy in the future. That's what they're buying.
Okay, thanks.
And that's what we've had in the past.
Yeah, I was gonna make that point too, Phyllis, that the value of the lot on the other side, that they have the rights to that, should be part of the appraisal, I think.
Well, I think that's part of the relocation process we'll work on, Steve.
Okay, I think, is everybody in accordance with this, coming up with a process? We might end up with all of the people over there wanting to sell to us perhaps, although I think some of them want to stay there, and they're going to want to move over to the other side and maybe get a new trailer to move in instead of their old funky one perhaps. So thumbs up on following this process?
Yeah, I think we need to. We have to, actually.
Yeah. So what else do we have to do here, Phyllis? We've run over our 2 o'clock time.
We are, Chris, do you have a slide on the mineral impact fees, which is actually...
I do. I have a couple last slides. I'll go over them real quickly, if we got time, or we can save it. So I just run through them. So the next one I had was, again, this is for a relocation plan would actually be developed, and some other notices that we're recommending should be provided here in the near future. Just a general information notice that we also have a template for the existing tenants and owners. Again, that, hey, the redevelopment of this project is not requiring you to leave. So it's kind of another CYA. And then obviously going forward with HCPEC will be submitting a proposal to do an actual relocation plan. So we'll get that to you too here in the near future. So what we're looking for there is just to, again, direct the team to continue to assist with these notices, these general information notices that are telling people, hey, you don't have to move because of this project as a CYA. And then at some point, you know, once you see HCPEC's proposal for a relocation plan, make a decision then about whether or not to pursue that.
And I believe some of this, the organization that Chris belongs to, Project Moxie, so the 50% funding for this part of this project is coming from DOLA. That was a grant that we received for planning. So we'll look for funds for some of these pieces. And when we submitted our first and second quarter reports to DOLA, I had the Division of Housing, DOLA's Division of Housing, contacting me saying, you know, this project would qualify for funds. So like all these other funds, we're going to be looking for support also. Okay.
So then I wanted to just share real quickly, there's 2 last funding sources. One is there is funding through Fema and the Department of Homeland Security. It will come out at the end of the month, and applications will run through January 29th. I'm attending another webinar on this tomorrow. So, you know, it's based on initial conversations. This may be a source for some of those acquisitions and or relocation monies as well, because they're in the floodplain and debris flow. So, again, the direction we're looking is just to continue to follow that funding, and when it becomes available, potentially submit an application. So that wouldn't even be till later this fall. So we'll keep you apprised of that funding source, but it is another source. And then lastly is what Phyllis is talking about, the DOLA monies, the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Program. So this has a clock. So this actually opened today, and the first round of applications are due October 1st. They changed their cycle system this year. So the first step would be needing to get with Greg Winkler and just telling him, hey, we plan to submit one or not, you know, and then we can, the direction we're looking for is to assist with the development of that application. But they are due October 1st, that one, Phyllis.
Saw that.
So I think that was it.
So we need thumbs up to pursue the energy assistance grant, and that makes sense to pursue it and see if we can get it. It probably would make Garfield County mad if we apply for energy assistance money, that, so be it.
We've received money from DOLA many times. We got, I helped Greg Winkler write the grant application for the Basalt Library. Greg's a great ally for Pickens County, and I've known him for, I don't know, 15 years, so, yeah. He's always more than willing to help us get through those little quirks that we have as Pickens County.
And Greg is very aware of the Phillips Park. I think it might have been a month after we purchased it, we were talking to him.
Yep, he's a great guy.
Okay. So we're going to apply and keep looking for funds. It's a very attractive project. I mean, it's rural, it's got a lot going for it, and there's a lot of people that live there. And when you all purchased it to preserve that housing for people, it's got a great start.
And all the agencies are really excited. All of our initial conversations with each of these agencies, they're very excited about this project as well. They think it's a great project.
Let them know they can come visit anytime they want.
We will let them know.
Thanks for all your hard work.
All right,
Okay,
thanks,
thank you.
everybody.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Thanks, Chris.
So moving on our agenda, we have future agendas next. John?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Just a couple of items to note for you. One, budget season is quickly approaching, so you're going to see the work sessions lengthening and filling up with those meetings, particularly for the board, starting in October, really through the end of the year. Then the other item I'd note for you that we were scheduled to have a joint meeting with the City of Aspen on November 5th. That was on a Thursday due to elections. The City of Aspen is proposing moving that to November 17th. That turns out to be right now a full day of scheduled budget discussions, speaking of which, for you. So we're trying to work with the city right now to find another date where both bodies are open for our next quarterly. And we're going to go ahead and start working on 2021 dates for those joint meetings. Now, it looks like we're looking at the first Tuesday of February, May, and August, and then the third Tuesday of November for next year, but more to come on that. So we're still working on that meeting, so that will probably, it could even change to the first week of December. And that's all I have on future agendas.
Steve?
Any items, Patty?
Yeah, right now I have tentative plans. I have to go down to University Hospital again in October. So I will be out of town probably. This is kind of sketchy right now, John, but do you want me to just let Charlotte know so she can fill the dates in? Okay, I'll send it on to Charlotte. It's in October 20th to that long weekend there. And on Wednesday, 9/9, we have the airport layout plan. It's our first reading reso. I think we're going to talk about that later today. But I was surprised we already had that reso booked on our schedule. We just kind of saving space in case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're saving space. We can, as the board, needs more time, we can certainly move that out.
Okay, great.
We're just trying to reserve space, both for work sessions and resolution,
Okay.
given previous future agenda discussions.
Kelly, did you want to comment on that one, or because I have some more? Okay, go. I'll wait.
Yeah, no, just on a related note, I wouldn't add much to the 23rd. if we're keeping that as scheduled. Doesn't look like a lot, that's a tactic.
Yeah,
Including
the 23rd is a bit busy. And then on the 14th of October, we need to move the ski company to the last item on the agenda, please. You want me to make a note of that to Charlotte also?
I'm doing it right now, Patty.
Okay, thank you. And on October 27th, I have an ACRA meeting that morning that lasts generally from 8:30 to 10:30, 11. And I think we scheduled something significant that morning. What did we schedule? Livable and some budget presentation, a 3-hour budget presentation to start at 9. So, I don't know what you want to do about that. If it's not able to be moved, I will just have to come in late.
Okay, we will look at that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can move a 3-hour meeting to any place you can fit it in, so I'll just have to try to do the first member comments at the ACRA meeting. I'll ask permission to go first, which means I can get out of there sooner than later, if that works best for you, John. And
We'll take a look at it. It's always better for us if all 5 of you can be there.
I doubt you can move at that 3-hour meeting, but anyway, because ACRA is always that last Tuesday of the month. And that's all I have for future agendas.
Okay, and I don't think we have any other, I have 3 things written down that we need to talk about for open discussion. Do you have anything, John, specifically?
You know, we can wait on it. We haven't had a COVID update, so it's just going to give a quick update on things, the status of our corona meter, and just some of the conversations we're having with the state. We can hold on that until next week also. So I'll leave it up to you, Steve, if you want me to go into that or not.
Okay, we probably better skip the full report for today. I have 2 really quick items. Let me just run through them. One, we've been trying to determine at the last regular meeting if anybody seconded the motion to continue the Aspen Valley Ranch issue to, I think it was September 23rd. Greg made the motion, and then there was some chatter, and right when I think someone was seconding it, I saw that Glenn Horn had his hand up, and I started to recognize him to speak. So on the tape, we cannot hear if that motion was seconded or not. Does anybody recall if you seconded the motion to continue the Aspen Valley Ranch issue?
Steve, I went back and listened to it, and I didn't hear anyone second the motion.
Yeah, and we have a solution. If nobody can remember seconding it, what we will do is bring it back. We're going to reconsider it, remake the motion at our next regular meeting, and that will solve it. But if someone remembers having made the motion right now, then we could just, put that into the minutes, who seconded the motion.
Y'all need to start seconding my motions.
Or at least remembering who seconds them.
What am I, chopped liver?
And I actually do remember sometime in the meeting hearing someone second a motion when I was talking. It was like in my ear, I could hear them say it, and it might have been at that instant, but we cannot hear it on the tape at all, and we don't have any record of it. Okay, so we'll just bring that up on the 9th, and we'll correct it. The second short item is in terms of the meetings with Senator Bennett tomorrow. We pretty much decided that Patty will go to ACES instead of me. I'm not sure that I should go to any meetings with Senator Bennett, but that way Patty can talk about the public health issues, the COVID response and all of that. And Greg, you should still plan on going to the Elgibel meeting. I'm gonna try to go to the Elgibel meeting. I just need to know what time that is in the meeting place. Do you have that,
That's
Greg?
at 1:30 at Crown Mountain Park, 448 Valley Road.
Okay.
So is that regarding the tree farm discussion?
It is. Or no, not tree farm. It's regarding the U.S. Forest Service property.
That
That's
is a
the
tree farm.
other
I've
tree
got
farm.
a lot of history involved.
Oh, you're right. It is.
So maybe I should attend as well, Steve. I've sat in with the Forest Service and Eagle County in years past in the discussion and brought our interest in that property to light. So
I'd happily defer. I think that one of the points was if we wouldn't have a time to notice it in the event of a quorum there. So I'll probably not go if you do, and that's okay.
well, I would just offer that just because I've been involved in the past. So
Yeah, I think George
Right.
should go. And Greg, isn't there one Thompson Divide? Are you gonna, are they having one there
I am
too?
going to that one too.
Okay.
I'm going to that also. So I'm fine. I'll get plenty of time there
Okay.
going to meetings. Don't worry about me.
I do have recent history with talking with Eagle County commissioners about the tree farm property and the housing possibilities there. So, and also the possibility for a senior center there. So it would make sense if George and I were the two who go, and I will go if I am feeling well enough and not like, possibility of passing a bug on to other people.
Okay. Well, I'll plan on not going to make it easier.
Stay away. I won't go anywhere tomorrow.
And then
Okay.
there's one other event, but it's very limited in how many people. I was invited on Sunday by John Whitney to attend that. It's because I brought up the issue of the Postal Service in the election. So it's not really a Michael Bennett issue meeting. It's more of a campaign type meeting. So I will be going to that one in Elgibel in the afternoon tomorrow. But it's really limited in numbers apparently.
And Patty, I was invited to that one also, so I'm planning to be there. But if anybody else thinks they want to be there, I'll defer.
What time is that meeting, Greg? Do you remember? 4:30?
So it's 4:40.
4:40, okay.
Okay, then the big item, and we need to spend more than just a few minutes on this, is our hemp proposal. There are kind of a lot of irons in the fire on this one right at the moment. And John Ely, do you want to try to lead us through our options on this right now?
Sure, Steve. The dilemma is that industrial hemp production is regulated through the Department of Agriculture at the state level. It is, it's handled as a registration as opposed to a license event. An application is filed with the state CDA. They process it and issue a registration or not, and then the cultivator is free to start farming industrial hemp. This is different from the protocol for medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, where there is a local jurisdiction licensing process which ties into a state licensing process as well. That allows both the state and the local jurisdiction to have an equal say in whether or not a marijuana facility is established. The absence of that in the realm of industrial hemp is what has given rise to a problem, I guess, and how to deal with hemp that's being produced on small lots in predominantly residential neighborhoods as opposed to larger lot agricultural property. So and I've talked quite a bit with the principal regulator and program administrator, excuse me, for the Department of Agriculture. And basically the way that the CDA looks at hemp registration is if the local jurisdiction does not have a zoning or regulation that prohibits agriculture, then they're going to seriously consider and most probably issue a registration for industrial hemp. And the strong opinion of the CDA is that industrial hemp is treated as any other agricultural crops. So if you are on a property that allows for the cultivation of tomatoes or peaches or anything else, then you're going to be able to cultivate industrial hemp as well. And, you know, you can appreciate the logic of the CDA when it comes to that sort of a broad brush distinction, but the practical reality is smaller parcels do present a dilemma. When you cultivate industrial hemp, the impacts of the actual cultivation are, you know, basically the same as the psychoactive marijuana plants, which is they do throw off a strong odor, and that the odor is prevalent when the barometer dips down like it does in the evening. So that's, you know, right when people are home in residential neighborhoods. The dilemma with enacting a zoning scheme, though, is rooted in that orientation of the CDA. If one agricultural crop is allowed, then another agricultural crop is going to be allowed, and the CDA will be issuing a registration for that. However, as well as you and Kelly both know from your participation in CCI, the CDA has softened its approach now and has changed so much that is willing to enter into an MOU with local jurisdictions. I flipped out a draft MOU to the board just to look at, and that MOU is not prepared by me. That has been already prepared by the CDA on our behalf for us to consider. The MOU is relatively straightforward. It's easy to adopt on the part of the county because it takes less procedural process than an IGA. The MOU is limited, though, in that it's basically just an informational sharing process. So we don't get to participate in the review of an application for registration, and we don't necessarily get to even know about the application, and therefore we can't give any information to the CDA in advance of a registration being issued. It's interesting, though, to note on there's a third section of their draft, which does leave the door open in a significant way. The CDA's approach to industrial hemp, being that as any other agricultural crop, would tend to deflect any type of county action on a zoning enforcement that does not relate specifically to agricultural activity in general. But in on the third page, the CDA recognizes that the MOU is entered into and information pursuant to the terms of the MOA is given to the county by the CDA for the purpose of law enforcement, including zoning enforcement. So with that recognition by the CDA, I think the prospect of a zoning action has been opened up for local jurisdictions, such that if we establish a zoning scheme that recognizes agricultural activity in general, we can distinguish between general agricultural activity and specifically industrial hemp, and probably go in the direction of making industrial hemp a special review, so that there must be a special review granted by the BOCC for the ability to conduct the use under an underlying zoning. And that way, when you have cultivation of hemp that is proposed on say a small property, that may be in a neighborhood that has, larger property with other agricultural activity. We don't have to impact, any other agricultural activity, particularly agricultural activity that's already been established, and we can focus on a special review for industrial hemp. So I've been, recently, when Kelly passed on the information to me last Friday, having discussions with the CCI through Daphne Gervais, I think is how she pronounces her last name. I might be butchering her name, poor Daphne. But at any rate, we've had a couple of conversations now, and we both perceive the opportunity perhaps to continue to talk to CDA, and even through, the governor's office, because the CDA is an administrative arm of the executive branch of state government, to try to get the CDA to expand their concept of the use of this MOU to allow us to get information in advance of the registration being granted, so that we can give referral comments, if you will, to the CDA to say that, okay, this property is acceptable, this property is not acceptable for industrial hemp. And that way, if somebody is, say, an agriculturalist who's looking to change their crop or to expand into a different area of agricultural activity and cultivation, before there's an investment in either machinery or seed or anything else, to try to get ahead of a registration. So I'm kind of hopeful of that, and working with CCI and trying to get that dialogue going with CDA. Right now, CDA is willing to only do the form MOU that I distributed to the board already. They're not willing to deviate from that. I can certainly understand why they wouldn't want to do it individually for every jurisdiction, just because it would be difficult to conclude, a negotiation and a final document. But if we can get the CDA to be willing to disseminate information to local jurisdictions in advance of the registration instead of afterwards, I think we would be that much more ahead of the game and in a better position to serve the public that would be interested in what's going on property, as well as the cultivator who's interested in raising a crop. So with that, I think that I would recommend that we discuss this further in a more formal setting of a regular meeting, and get direction from the board to refer a zoning approach to regulation of industrial hemp to the Planning and Zoning Commission, get a zoning recommendation from them for consideration by the BOCC, and go forward on the MOU, at least as it's presented now.
I have a question, Steve.
Kelly? Okay, go ahead, Patty, and then Kelly.
Okay.
Just real quick, what about the existing hemp grow? Is that kind of a moot point at this point because it's already been permitted?
It's a moot point for this year. Registrations are for a singular annual term, sort of like the recreational or medical marijuana license. And plus the fact there is no existing zoning that would have prohibited the establishment of the crop. We can't change our zoning scheme right now and eliminate a use that was otherwise legally begun.
Okay.
So this would be for the purposes of the next growing season, or 2021 year.
Okay, thank you.
I just would flag a question that I have for when we have a future conversation, but in my reading of the draft MOU that was supplied is it's unclear to me what information that we might obtain from CDA that we would be able to use publicly. Because it sounded like a lot of their concern was due to confidential and proprietary and trade-based information. So I just would like to understand more clearly how we would be able to, take what we get from them in a way that's meaningful for public notification.
Sure.
And we don't have to discuss that now, but I do want to have that conversation when this comes back.
George?
Yeah, so John, you laid out a lot of information, and but Mike, it was a little confusing because if we did not have an MOU, wouldn't we still have the ability to change our zoning as we do for other cases?
We always have the ability to change zoning, but from my dialogue with the CDA earlier this year, around the end of the winter, it was clear that their treatment of industrial hemp would be the same as any other agricultural activity, particularly a cultivation type of event. So if we try to distinguish different types of crop in our zoning treatment, being able to enforce it would probably run afoul of the CDA, such that there would be an ability to construct a defense for somebody who we would be prosecuting for zoning enforcement, and who would at the same time be operating legally under the state registration for the cultivation of a particular crop. So, and when we are at odds in too stark a contrast with the state government, the state is going to prevail over the county. And so we would be faced with, I think, a bit of a conundrum trying to enforce that type of a zoning distinction. I think the door is cracked open a bit in the terms of the MOU, which are now existing in this form that the CDA is advancing for use with local jurisdictions, in that they recognize that this information that is going to be disseminated to local jurisdictions with this MOU is the type of information that relates to a registered cultivator. So it's a registration that's already occurred type of an event. And we would get that information specifically for the purpose of zoning enforcement. So there's an implied recognition within the body of this CDA-approved MOU that leads in the direction, and that courts can recognize that, yes, even though a registration has issued from the state, a local jurisdiction can exercise land use control authority and zoning authority to regulate land use. So it seems to, with this one, MOU form, draw that line of distinction between the aspects of authority. Yes, only the state has the ability to regulate cultivation of industrial hemp, but it in no way supersedes local jurisdictions' authority under zoning and land use regulation.
All right, thanks for that. That helps out a lot. So if we step back to future agendas, then we should look at trying to get this on our whenever is possible, as soon as possible, just get this process moving along.
I think I would propose doing it with a draft code amendment. That way we can take specific language that is not necessarily, well, obviously wouldn't be adopted by the BOCC, but certain specific language that is actively recommended to the Planning and Zoning Commission, so that the P&Z is clear as to what it is they're looking at.
All right, well, let's get that on near in the future agenda, since it has to get onto the P&Z's time frame as well.
John, would this be in a work session that we would discuss the wording of it? I mean, you would come up with a proposed wording, or or would we have to do it in a regular meeting to then refer it to the P&Z?
I would do it in a regular meeting, Steve, with a proposed resolution, just as an informal resolution to refer certain language that the BOCC has a chance to review to the P&Z for their recommendation, one way or the other, for inclusion into our, probably would be included in all of our rural land zone districts. And that would give everybody.
Okay, and I mean, I think that sounds like
Okay.
I think that's a good strategy for us to do on a county level. There's still two other things that Daphne Gervais is working on at CCI. One with Jeff Lawrence from the CDPHE has proposed thing, and then there's the proposed statutory change that has been written up by the Elbert County attorney. So both of those are things that we could continue pursuing through CCI, but I mean, I agree with George. I think we should be trying to do something locally also.
Well, this gives us an opportunity to do something, but you're right. The dialogue with concerning the Elbert County efforts is still ongoing. At this time, neither Daphne nor I have been able to get a hold of Jeff Lawrence, which I thought was interesting in that the CDPHE of all state departments is interested in industrial hemp. I did not expect that at all, actually. But yes, and the CDPHE may be of assistance to us in trying to broaden the terms of this Department of Agriculture MOU. Okay, well, that's all I have, unless more direction or questions.
So I guess we should do thumbs up to, does everyone agree with us doing it, proposing a code change amendment to the P&Z to consider? So I think Kelly gave a nod. Pat?
I'm fine. So, but John, we're going to bring it back at a regular meeting in a form of a reso and then send it to P&Z? Is that what you said?
That would be my suggestion.
Have we had...
A lot of times when staff initiates a zoning change, takes it directly to P&Z first, there is discussion, in fact, invariably, by the P&Z as to, well, how does the BOCC feel about this? Has there been any discussion? For some unknown reason, it seems to invite a little bit of confusion. That's why I was thinking with just an informal reso of referral from the BOCC to the P&Z, it makes it clear what exactly the BOCC is asking the P&Z to consider and to make a recommendation.
Right, and I think that does go both ways, because sometimes P&Z says, well, the board's already made up their mind. They're just sending it to us just so we can stamp it and move it back to them. So that's a very delicate situation. So I'll see how that first reso comes out and make my decision at that time.
So, John, I do have one question. There are other crops and products that you could consider nuisance ones. For instance, if somebody wanted to do a pig farm on a small acreage in a residential thing, or a lavender field, or some other plant that's really puts out a lot of odor that could be cause allergic reaction or something in people, and maybe we want to have a little broader thing for nuisance things, including industrial hemp. Also, the industrial hemp, the proximity to a legal marijuana grow operation should be taken into consideration too, because there could be cross-pollination issues that we would help protect both the hemp grower and the marijuana grower from having their crop be cross-pollinated and then put into jeopardy as to its value.
Well, Steve, as to the other point, though, certainly with slaughterhouses or rendering operations, that can certainly be a nuisance type of event, or even high-density feedlots can be a nuisance event. I sure never thought about lavender being a nuisance, so I gotta tell you. Well, I'll tell you what.
I think if I was next to a lavender field, I would have to move. I wouldn't be able, I'd have such bad headaches, I would have to just be out of there.
I think maybe I'll focus it on just the industrial hemp, and then let the board discuss it at the meeting and broaden it as appropriate, and then rather than trying to take a stab at that. But yeah, that's a good idea to include other things now.
Okay, Steve, we need to take a break because we're a half an hour behind schedule and we're supposed to have started the airport a bit ago.
So, yeah, I want to hold the board. We could just have people, I mean, Patty, you're the only one there in the meeting room. All the rest of us are at home, and we could just do 5-minute, does everybody want to do a 5-minute break, and then that way we can all get up and stretch at the same time, and then we'll tackle the airport thing? I think since we are behind schedule, we don't want to do a 15-minute break. Okay, so we'll do a 5-minute break. We'll start just 2:58 is what time I have.
Why don't we just start at 3 o'clock?
take-
Let's just, how about if we just come back at 3? That makes it easier for everybody
See
to
you at
keep
3.
time.
3 o'clock, that's okay. Okay, thanks.
5, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is a discussion. This will be our second discussion on the ASC Vision Committee final recommendations to the BOCC. And I guess John Peacock, you'll be the one leading the main discussion on this.
Yeah, Steve, thank you. John Peacock, County Manager. Can you all see my screen? Did I share that successfully? Okay. So, as you might recall, we are working our way through the Vision Committee recommendations. We are just about here on our ladder rung right now, getting ready to take the step into the more challenging issues. What we're doing, and we will go back through this, I'm not going to do this today, I'm going to keep going on to new areas, but we are capturing as we go along where you've reached agreement and where you've either had additions or where you haven't reached agreement and needed more information and discussion as we go through. And so we have been working through our easier items. We ended at the open air jetways last time, so we have a homework assignment to just really understand if these were the only means to provide the electrical and tempered air hookup on the commercial aircraft before you made a decision on that, which brings us now to construction phasing. And this is one that, the construction phasing is terminal improvements, airfield improvements, and new aircraft, think appropriately to minimize community disruption. We urge the BOCC to carefully consider the order of improvements. This is one that all 5 of you agreed to. It's also one that's difficult to define until we get into a further stage of kind of design and project phasing, but it's more of almost a value statement to really make sure that you're keeping both the length of time and level of community disruption in mind as you think about how you phase and sync improvements at the airport. So this is one initially all 5 of you agreed to, but it's also one that we'll probably have to define or constantly come back to as we get further into the planning and design. And Steve, do you want to call on commissioners or?
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you. I just want to note, I do think community disruption is important to obviously consider, but I did sort of submit a comment along with this about whether community disruption is the primary goal that phasing should be organized around, or, if the projects related to community consensus would be more appropriate. And I look at like the terminal redevelopment as far as, there's not a lot of discord associated with redeveloping our terminal, and perhaps using community consensus as an organizing principle for how we phase should be kept in mind too. And, I know we haven't agreed to a construction project yet, so it's premature to talk about phasing. So I would just offer that as a principle to keep in mind when we think about what phasing might look like. And, for example, do we trade off some GA parking you know, what does that look like? Do we have more drop and goes for a period of time in order to get the terminal done earlier? You know, might be something to keep in mind. So that's where my thoughts are on that. You know, I think we're talking about principles of construction phasing rather than the actual construction phases, since we don't know if we're going to build up or what at this point. And I'll leave that at that.
No, that's well put. And there are going to be multiple factors that the board's going to have to consider. As you said, Kelly, where is their community consensus and desire for improvements? How is funding lining up for the different projects? And then, as you already alluded to also, the technical aspects of the project and what are the trade-offs there. So there's going to be a lot to consider. And I think how you put it is really good. This is really about what are those principles or lenses that you all need to be viewing it through for the community. In general, though, does this remain a thumbs up with all of those, I think, caveats and explanations in mind? Or is there more conversation?
So, I have a question. Greg, you have a question?
I had a comment, but go ahead, Steve.
Well, my thought is we don't need to decide what is right now, not what is the time schedule or the thinking what goes first before another, but just that we need to follow this general principle. Is that right, John?
Yeah.
Steve, that kind of answered my question. I'm just thinking regarding new aircraft's thinking appropriately. That implies we're looking at a timeline that we have no control over based on when new aircraft become the standard and would be employed by the airlines. So I'm looking at this thinking, well, it sounds as if this is not just phasing of what goes first and what comes after, but really it implies we're going to wait for the appropriate new aircraft. And if that's part of the conversation, fine. I just want to make sure we're clear because this is, you know, whether we do the terminal or the airfield first is one thing, but the new aircraft facet of that makes it into a timeline and, you know, how many years out or whatever, a question, regardless of whether we do terminal or airfield first. I'd say somebody has to explain that to me.
You know, so Greg, I think, I think it has to do with life cycles of existing as well as potentially future aircraft. But I think this is going to be brought into sharper relief too when you start talking about if there is the desire to follow the recommendation to move to a full airport design group 3, there's the option that the vision committee has put in place, which is actually move the taxiway, which has a really different kind of phasing, because there it's really becomes about moving some of the buildings and such so that the taxiway center line can be moved versus if you're moving the runway, that's a more independent variable, if that makes sense. And so that all of these become interrelated to a certain degree. So I'm wondering if your question isn't going to be answered a little bit as we start talking about some of the other recommendations too, if that makes sense.
Right, that's fine. I'm happy to go along. I just want to acknowledge that was the concern. Thanks.
Steve? Steve?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Kelly, your point was really well made. I think that's critical in looking at this section here. And I think, you know, I've worked in construction. I ran a construction company. I know phasing is important. But, you know, there might be other priorities here for us. And, you know, there's sometimes you just have to figure out how to face things and what will work for what direction we want to go and support with the community. So I think we have other things to discuss and come back to this one once we actually have come up with what we're going to do with the common ground plan, the layout plan for the airport, and then what we want to do with that once we move forward on that aspect. So Kelly, I really appreciate you bringing that up.
All right, so I'll ask it again. I think we have some caveats or clarifications, maybe a better term around this one to capture, but with those, that this is really taking into account the lenses that we're going to prioritize project phases with, which could be community desire, funding availability, and technical aspects, which you all will be considering on an ongoing basis. The basic principle is to try and do that in a way that essentially minimizes community disruption. Is that something you all are still agreeing to with these comments in mind?
I think you have to add in what Kelly said. It's not just community disruption. It's the community agreement on where we want to go. And it might be a little more disruptive, but it might be at a different direction. And I think that's something we have to take into consideration as we make this decision. Excuse me.
Right.
So, just for clarification, when we're talking about community agreement, are we talking about our task forces or the community at large? I'm a little confused there.
I don't know. It depends on who you're talking to on what day, George.
Right. But we know we'll never get a community at large consensus on anything, right?
Right,
so
right.
If we're relying on the task forces, the committees, to provide information and recommendation, I'm just trying to clarify, Kelly, what are we really talking about when we talk about community agreement?
Mm-hmm. Well, George, I guess I just don't, on certain things I don't see as much difference as maybe you do. So if it's helpful to frame it within the context of these recommendations, I think that's fine. I think, for example, some of those might, be related to, for example, terminal redevelopment, greenhouse gas emissions, noise reduction, those kind of things that are general, but there's detailed, project recommendations within that I would say, we should prioritize those or balance prioritizing those with minimizing community disruption.
Right.
For example, so that's what I would say.
Okay, because I was hearing something a little bit different that was confusing me. Okay.
We'll try and capture this in kind of our comments, because we're going to run back through all these agreements one last time for you guys. So I think from my perspective, I think I understand what you're saying. We'll work on the language. So Patty, with the, and Kelly, I guess everyone, with the understanding that what we're really talking about then is, I guess, would it be appropriate to add all of the lenses, the community consensus, availability of financing and technical aspects of the community, technical aspects of the project, in a way that, along with minimizing community disruption? Does that capture everything?
Yeah, and we may add to it as we go along, but I think that does. It's not as simple as just one or two. We've had so much input and so many different priorities from people, but I think we have to look at the whole picture, because that's what we do as the BOCC. We don't just look at one aspect. We have to look at all of them.
And so we can lead off with the community aspect. Kelly, but I guess if we add that context in, does that work for everyone? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well,
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I feel like, financing questions are, sort of feasibility of things rather than sort of decision-making principles.
Fair enough.
So.
Okay, is that thumbs up with those caveats then?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot in this one. So a lot of agreement on maximizing the sustainability of the new airport. First 4 bullet points, we've talked about a little bit already in our previous meeting, but there would probably be a change here to recognize the change that the board made, that it's not just net zero, it's I believe the carbon neutral was the term that the board had asked to be included. Implement short and long range efficiency measures available to airfield and facilities. And these are going to be things like LED lighting, on-site renewables such as solar and geothermal that reduces the footprint. The third that I know there's questions on, which is reduce the overall use of aviation leaded fuel. I can come back to that. And maintain and strictly enforce curfew. These were the 4 that there was unanimous agreement, although there is a question about the feasibility of the leaded fuel piece. The FAA has been working to develop alternatives to leaded fuel for the piston-driven. This is for the piston-driven aircraft. What the lead effectively does is reduces knocking and such. Same that higher octane fuel does in your car. And so they are continuing to work on alternatives to leaded fuel. They're not broadly available yet, but I think the idea here is a vision for, the future of the airport is that we prepare both our infrastructure, but more importantly, I think our business arrangements, so that as soon as the other fuel options are available, we're ensuring that they're being used in our community. And that's on the leaded fuel. So just going to stick on the 4 green bullet points right now and see if there are questions there.
So I have a question on the definition of net zero. We can design, a typical net zero project, the building is designed as energy efficiently as possible. Doesn't quite achieve full net zero until they do add in a component of renewable energy production of some fashion. So are we looking at that, which definition of net zero? I know we want to make the terminal, all the facilities as energy efficient as possible, but then are we going to rely on a big solar farm kind of an aspect of it or something to then achieve that final definition of net zero?
Yeah, so when we get to the airport layout plan, Steve, you'll see that there is a space reservation for solar facilities. It may be possible to expand on those. There's also likely good opportunity because of the amount of land out there for geothermal options on heating and cooling of the facilities to reduce energy use. The preference of the Vision Committee was to do as much on-site mitigation, and that included all, things like solar, things like geothermal, and making the facilities more efficient. And then also looking at where the local mitigation maybe just could not match up, even if it's for emissions reductions, looking then secondarily at off-site mitigation opportunities. So I think that's answering your question.
Yeah, and I was thinking the only way to achieve it might be with off-site mitigation, buying into a solar farm somewhere else in the valley, or buying rainforest in Central America, or something or other that would mitigate that amount of carbon.
Yeah, and the Vision Committee was really clear. They wanted as much to be done on site as possible, so that there was, I guess, a maximized local benefit before off-site or carbon offsets were sought. I think Greg's
Yeah, Steve. Just want to make sure that we're clear with this. We're just talking about energy consumption alone in here. This is an energy conversation in this item. When we're talking net zero or sustainability, we could also be talking water, we could be talking resource use. We could be talking about other elements, whether or not, the inputs and the outputs match up, whether it's food containers or cardboard or water or other things as well. And I think that should certainly be part of the plan going forward. And I know it's been mentioned, but I want to just bring that in when we talk about sustainability and net zero here. We're talking about energy in particular.
Yeah, that was the main focus of the conversation, Greg. Now that you, as the board, can add to that vision or goal. So
then I would expand this a little bit then, if this is the place to do it.
Other questions?
Kelly?
Yeah, another question. I support Greg's suggestion. There's things, again, there's sort of these things that we can do now and things that, have to be done long term. And so I think that there's operations elements of a sustainable airport facility that makes sense to just build into our vision, because that is our vision, right? We should be operating our airport in a sustainable way, whether now or into the future. And that can be offered in terms of operations and, expanded to include a variety of inputs, not just energy.
Is there some language that, if we were to put it into a bullet point, would capture these concerns, and then maybe the board could, I see George is trying to get into?
Well, I would suggest something like reduce, recycle, what's the third one? Reuse, reduce, recycle, which captures a lot of, I think, what Greg posed, if I understood Greg's comments correctly.
Okay. Greg, is that where you're going, and Kelly?
Yeah, I think so. We could put that phrase in there. Certainly that would work. I was thinking design all facilities to net zero resource balance or resource use, and it could involve reduce, reuse, recycle. Certainly as part of that. If we're going to say we want to eliminate plastic containers, for instance, or come up with a way to sustainably recycle them, that becomes part of the design. So simple things like that. A simple thing is a plastic container rule. You look at an airport, I think of DIA, and I see the plastic containers that really have a useful life of 3 minutes to get from the cash register to the table and then to the trash. And you just think there's got to be a better way. So let's incorporate that in this plan. So as a, for instance, net zero water, for instance, would be pretty tough. But, you know, I don't think we want to put a package plant out there, but has it been considered? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. I think just to have an eye to it, and as in the visioning process, it should be part of the vision, and then we decide what makes sense and what works. Just like the on-site mitigation may have to be a mile away, you know, for solar, for instance, and a mile away would be okay with me, you know, if it had to be a mile off site or something like that.
So we have the suggested addition of the kind of really focusing more on the inputs and outputs, the reduce, reuse, recycle kind of concepts. We understand that may be more difficult with some resources like water, which will certainly be part of the facilities, but the other inputs, the packaging for food and drinks and those sorts of things, looking at how we encourage those. So that is the addition that I'm hearing for the board's vision, really to expand on this from an energy perspective to a larger sustainability model.
Thanks. I think that sums it up pretty well.
So I'll just look for sorry.
I think I would make that an additional bullet point instead of trying to add on to the net zero concept, which has to do with almost more with the way the buildings are constructed, not how they're operated.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is basically if we were to just take the green bullet points, we're basically adding a 5th bullet point to capture this broader concept of sustainability. So with that addition, do we still have general agreement on these vision statements?
Yeah.
The others didn't have fully, so I just kind of want to walk through each of these. So electrify the airfield for both GA and commercial operations. The goal of that is to be able to plug in the aircraft so that they do not have to run their auxiliary power units pre-flight. And the auxiliary power units are basically the almost like an extra jet engine on the planes that turn a generator that allow both air tempering and also, you know, operation of the electronics and such on board. So the electrification of the airfield is really geared at significantly reducing or even eliminating that APU usage until a plane's ready to take off.
Excuse me, John. I'm looking at this list and I'm realizing I appreciate it. Some of it I realize is aspirational, some of it's doable. Is there a disagreement on any of them? If we're in I feel like we're rushed for time.
Well, I would be happy if you guys were able to go through these quicker. If there wasn't unanimous agreement, so I was going to step through these, but if you all want to pull them out one by one, we can do that.
If anybody wants to pull anything out one by one, I was going to suggest that, but otherwise I'd be willing to say, yeah, these are all noble goals here, and I'd certainly aim for them.
Well, I beg to differ a little. I had some more information I needed on some of them, like establish the most accurate emissions baseline possible. What does that mean? I mean, I just needed some more information. It's not that I don't support them. It's just that I don't think there's enough information, and those are my only things. You know, and the possibilities, the feasibility of financial incentive through things like landing fees and fuel prices, fees. Do we have that authority? Is that another one that's going to come back? We want to do it, but we are told we can. And so, like you said, Greg, these are all really noble, but what's the possibility of actually doing them all cost effective? I mean, we'd like to do I know, the best possible, but there's this thing called money and funding, and, so we have to at some point pick our priorities, I believe, and then set things up for the next wave of funding where we wouldn't have to tear the whole thing down again and start over. We could just, have some infrastructure in place that we could add to and build on. So I think, I think that's all part of the picture for electrifying the airport. We need to have the infrastructure in there, and when the time comes, we don't have to tear it all out to, to put in the things that make good sense environmentally. So.
Kelly?
I'll just quickly voice some of the specific concerns I had. So with regards to biofuels, I want to acknowledge that I think there's a life cycle question related to biofuels about the genuine ability of them to reduce global carbon footprint, not just the local carbon footprint. So, I trust that was debated, but that I flagged that as a concern. And then as far as the berming, it just raises a question regarding community character for me. Using what we can as strategies to reduce noise is important, but also balancing that with community character. And I'm surprised Patty didn't bring it up without not wanting the feeling of driving in a tunnel to get
It's
into
on my other page. It's on the backside.
So I'll just flag that. And then regarding public transport. So is aviation public transport related to commercial aviation? This is worded a little awkwardly for me. I'm not sure of the general person. I don't fully understand it, so maybe there's some wordsmithing here to make it just say what we were trying to say. So emphasizing public transport, aviation, and ground as a first choice solution for all users. Ground transportation, absolutely, that makes total sense. Emphasizing aviation public transport doesn't totally make sense to me. So maybe we just clean up what we're really trying to say, emphasizing commercial aviation, I think is what they're getting at. And then incentivize quieter planes. I'm happy to, again, I think there's a big question mark of okay, what are all the tools we need to do that? And I'm okay to figure that out separate from the vision document. I think incentivizing, quieter planes, absolutely, is a good vision goal to have. So those are my things to try and run through them quickly on this list.
Oh, great. So why don't I step through the bullet points that I heard get called out, and we'll just talk about those a little bit and see if we have enough information at the table now and or clarifications that we need to make, and we'll move through it that way. So the first, I think, Patty, you brought up the establishing the most accurate emissions baseline possible as a starting point, implement strategies to reduce emissions by at least 30% as soon as possible, but no later than 2030. And so there is more specificity in the report around this recommendation, and the recommendation was actually made on a combination of accuracy and also cost effectiveness. And the recommendation, the report, is actually to combine modeling, some of which has already started and been done, because that has been proven to be accurate, but also far more cost effective than setting up the ongoing monitoring stations and maintaining those. But to have some spot check with actual monitors that are here that can at least provide some confirmation about the accuracy of the modeling. We've already started putting some monitors, as the board is aware, in place for baseline measures. Now, they won't necessarily measure exactly the origin of the pollutants per se, but we will get measurements on BOCs and those sorts of things that we can then check against the modeling that's done around airport emissions. And this is actually something, Patty, that we already do to some degree as part of our greenhouse gas inventories. We're one of the first airports to do a greenhouse gas inventory. And so it'd be adding to that modeling for the VOCs and such. And Rich, I don't know if you can add on to that from some of the discussions that you've been having, or if we need to collect some more information on that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John. Working with Cindy out of Community Development, we have set up, right as COVID hit, we had the opportunity to go out and set up. I believe the board actually had asked about that opportunity. We did take that opportunity. And then with the airport closure coming up, we are also going to do the same. So we've got the canisters out again, and we're going to track that. So hopefully that'll help us distinguish a little bit. Like John said, I don't know that we'll be able to tell specifically where it's coming from, but at least we're going to have some indication of whenever that airport is even completely shut down, what that looks like. So at least we're starting to collect some of that data.
Well, yeah, my concern being that some of the emissions testing doesn't speciate.
It doesn't.
You know, it's just like sand when they do, sandwood. Where did it come from, Moab, or did it come from Siberia, or, or did it come from sanding the streets? Right. You have to speciate it out. So that was my concern. I think we can do the best that we can. Yeah. And I know that we are looking forward to seeing some of that data on emissions. And it's going to be tough because at the same time we close the airport, it's also a slow time for traffic on the highway. So, yes, yeah. So, but I think we have to go out there and just keep trying to gather information, and then, and I know that a concern of the community is that we're not expanding the realm of where we're testing for emissions, but then it kind of gets away from what is actually being caused by the airport. But, you go across to North 40 when those jets take off, and trust me, you know where it's coming from. So.
And Patty, that's where some of the modeling helps with that, attributing emissions.
Yeah, and sometimes modeling is sometimes all you can do in some cases. Mm-hmm. So be able to back it up with something makes it sound a little better. Mm-hmm. And then the other one I had, John, was the other one I had was the financial incentives for landing fees, fuel. I'm not sure. I think that's something that is evolving around the country, maybe, for greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, how you offset. But sometimes
we're confident right now that our on-airport infrastructure, so if we're doing on-airport solar or geothermal infrastructure that's directly supporting our airport operations, we're confident that we're able to support that kind of infrastructure with fees charged on airport. Where we need, I think, more conversation then is beyond just kind of the pricing incentive for larger versus smaller consumers of fuel and such. What is our latitude to use that as an incentive for more efficient aircraft or that sort of thing? Okay. So we have some more work to do there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
And then,
Don?
Yeah.
There should be, well, 2 points, but first of all, there should be on the next slide, I think there'd be 2 bullet points that go with number 2, is that correct?
Yeah, I think this is split into 2.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go.
That was the one we were just
Yeah,
talking about.
those were the 2 that desired further discussion from the board, for sure.
yeah. And so, the idea that the
Then
vision.
John, I do have another point about the measurement of the VOCs and whatnot. Just to note that in Ellen Anderson's full letter that she sent to us, she spoke a lot about this issue and was talking about the smell of the jet fuel at Buttermilk, but also people down by Cemetery Lane and Meadowwood smell the jet fuel. So I think we need to maybe do monitoring a little farther than just at the ABC or right at the airport. I think to monitor different places in the community and probably down valley in the direction of, I don't know, Woody Creek or the Aspen Village or somewhere might be appropriate places for monitoring also, to have a more comprehensive monitoring program.
So what I would suggest is that, you know, if this is the vision, that we bring in an air quality specialist to kind of talk you through those monitoring programs, so you can balance, because that was the conversation that happened with the vision committee around modeling versus the monitoring that you're talking about, Steve, and the ability to speciate. A lot of the smell is actually burnt jet fuel, not necessarily VOCs, was our understanding. And so I think if the vision is to have that kind of modeling, then you can bring in some more expertise to inform that, rather than designing here. It turns out it's a fairly complicated science that we need some more expertise at the table to talk about the hows and how to effectively do it.
John, that's where speciation comes into play. If you could, you know, put a monitor at the east end of town when, you know, when the planes are flying the other direction. That big guy came over this morning, and be able to speciate those emissions that you're collecting. But that's not what I think a capability that we have.
Greg.
I would just say that I think this, while we're acknowledging that it's difficult and we're not certain how successful we'll be in actually getting a handle on it, it's still really important. More people talk to me about air quality here in the valley, in the vicinity of the airport and points beyond, as Steve mentioned, than, you know, almost anything else. And I think that even if we come up with an inconclusive study, that's better than not having attempted it. So I would say that I would really like to see it. Let's bring in the experts to talk to us about what's possible for doing this, and then let's take steps so that we can at least say we're actually doing our best to determine what's going on with air quality, regardless whether it's airport or highway or, you know. I just think we owe that because what we have is a more congested, busier, denser field of operations in our community now, and air quality suffers from it. And we should have some knowledge about that. And this is the place to start.
Yeah, thanks, Greg and Steve. As far as the vision, remember that at the high level, did these 2 bullet points capture that intent without necessarily defining the how just yet? Yeah.
I think they do.
Okay. Kelly, you had brought up the biofuels, and there was a robust discussion about this. And from frankly, there's probably still more research that has to be done on the full life cycle of the fuel is probably where I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, where your concern lies, whether it's actually a carbon benefit or not over traditional aviation fuels. What we heard is there is a little bit of it depends in terms of how it's produced and where and those sorts of things. And I frankly do not know enough about that science. But we did hear both from FAA representatives who are looking at biofuels as kind of a bridge to meet emissions goals, as well as just some really well-informed people on our own vision committee that they felt that there were real options, but we would need to research them carefully. We also had people who had looked at the full life cycle of biofuels and were skeptical about how beneficial they actually were in closing the full carbon loop. At the end of the day, they felt, after hearing from the experts and such, that there was enough evidence to really look into biofuels and incorporate them into the mix of fuels. But you'll see that language about genuinely reducing the overall footprint was a nod to the skepticism, and that we really do need to evaluate options. There are very limited options available to us now, but more and more seem to be coming on the market. Most of them right now seem to be coming from California and such. And so we have not done the research to be able to answer your question conclusively, other than there seemed to be enough conversation during the vision process that the skeptics were willing to, accept it with the nod that we would really spend some time researching those options before we just said, oh, we've got biofuel and we're meeting our goals because of it. I don't know if that helps or not in terms of the conversation that happened there.
Yeah, thanks. It flags the same concerns I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice, John. I would agree with that. If you look at ethanol for an example, ethanol made from corn, there's pretty good evidence that there's a higher carbon footprint to produce the corn, to produce the ethanol, than you're actually saving from burning the ethanol. Ethanol made from sugarcane is a different matter. It seems to be a more positive outcome from that. So the process whereby they're making the airline biofuel would be key to the discussion.
Well, and I do know there's already a discussion about bringing biofuel mix in. Rich, I don't know if you've got an update on that, but I do think it requires, again, some more research and expertise to make sure it's accomplishing the goal, and not, as you said, Steve, based on how it's produced and where, if it's adding to the problem.
Greg?
I'm just thinking, looking down at incentivize quieter planes, I'm just wondering if we should be incentivizing alternative fuels like biofuels. It's aspirational. It's not something we're going to have a lot of control over. The biofuel industry is going to be a global market that's going to have to emerge. It's extremely expensive. It's such multiple times the cost of regular fuel. So I don't think we can do it on our own. We could certainly incentivize it and try and be a model, but I just don't know it would be like saying we're going to incorporate quieter planes. It's aspirational. I'm not sure if it gets us any closer to the goal. I'm wrestling with that. I don't want to back away from something like this, but I also don't think we're going to have an awful lot of influence on the availability of biofuel with a small market. I know at LAX, United Airlines has, is it 10%? It's not even 10%. Maybe it's 1% of their fuels biofuel. It's 10. It's a tiny amount, and the projected amounts to 2040 I just looked up are maybe 5% or something like that. So it's a tiny thing. Of course, it's a step in the right direction, and I would incentivize it and be aspirational toward it, but I don't think we should get hung up on it and with our airport, because once it becomes available, I think we'll be able to put it in the tank and sell it along, instead of the other stuff. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what else we can do. I think that's what I got from the report and looking at the various comments from all the people involved.
Yeah, Greg, I think that's an accurate representation of the different lines of conversation. I think, but if it's our vision, we can be on the leading edge of that as it becomes available.
I'm with you.
Okay. The berms, that was also a very healthy discussion. There's a lot of conversation around that. I will say that the berms have, in one way or another, been in the master plan that was approved as far back as 2012. And it is really about the impact, particularly to the North 40 community, as far as having some sound wall and berming. And this was again an area where there was, like I said, a lot of robust discussion and a compromise. And so there's a lot of concern, particularly about the idea of sound walls and feeling like you're driving through the Royal Gorge or something coming up Highway 82. And, the compromise was really the use of landscaping and easing the other side so that the visual impact was lessened. It's certainly something that, as part of our West of Maroon Creek plan and such, we've discouraged berming along Highway 82. The Vision Committee, though, I think felt that the airport was a unique enough of a use and impact on the neighbors that compromising with sound walls, with well-landscaped berms to enhance the visual appearance from Highway 82 and the North 40 was the right compromise given the impact to the neighboring community. So, yeah.
Steve?
I think he's giving you the Patty.
Yeah, and one of the things we learned way back when the Maroon Creek Club did their berms, and it was like a tunnel, and we got them to mitigate some of that back, but there's an angle that you have to build berms for noise, and sometimes that dictates the height, the slope, all that stuff. So that also has to be taken into consideration, because the last thing you want to do is build a berm that looks good but doesn't do anything. So that comes into play as far as the technology behind building berms for sound mitigation. So we'll have to look at that when we get to that point in that design, but I think that's not going to happen tomorrow. Maybe the next day.
Yeah, and there's a combination of recommendations about moving larger aircraft to the north, away from the North 40, so you have the smaller aircraft, which allows you to maybe have a little bit lower sound wall and berm, to your point, Patty. Mm-hmm. at least in some of the areas around the airport.
Yeah, and sometimes moving them away may make it so it's louder. I mean, that's the technical stuff that's why we have technical people to help us.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that answers any of those concerns, or if you want some more background on the berms and sound walls.
I don't think I need any more background. Yeah,
Okay.
I can be okay with, I can accept it.
Yeah, I know it's a tough one because it's not something we'd encourage anywhere else, and it was definitely because of the uniqueness. Incentivize quieter planes. That is one that, frankly, it is aspirational. I think there may be various mechanisms to do that, whether it's financial incentives or even more recognition in the community for those who are achieving fly quiet goals and such. That needs to be fleshed out in terms of mechanisms a little bit more. And then this last one, yeah, and Rich, you may be able to jump in here. I think the ground transportation as first choice is clear. I think on the aviation side, that a lot of the metrics around impact was around the emissions per person coming in, and I think there's a lot of recognition that commercial aircraft, because they bring in more people for a landing takeoff cycle, tend to have a much lower carbon impact than general aviation aircraft, which will have fewer people for a landing takeoff cycle. And so I think assuming the same number of people coming in, if they're coming in via aviation modes that encourage, less emissions per person, so that would be commercial flights and such, that gets us closer to meeting our goals and probably would reduce the GA operations. Now, whether that actually happens or not, I don't know, but I think the general feeling is that to the degree that we can emphasize commercial, and then once they come in that way, that we can emphasize transit as first choice options for people coming into the community, we help the sustainability. So Kelly, we can probably word that better, if that's, I don't know if that helps.
I think this can be clear. This can be clearer. Just say what we're trying to do. Emphasize commercial aviation and public ground transportation as the first choice solution.
Frank, since we're being aspirational, since we're visioning here, can we not use emphasize and say mandate?
Well,
I don't think we can mandate.
yeah, I think we're struggling with those words around feasibility and such. But this is your document.
There was,
I recognize the problems with the aviation, mandating anything with FAA airspace is pretty tough, but on the ground, we own the ground. We rule the ground, don't we?
So Greg, I'm gonna call your wife and let her know you said that.
there was a lot of discussion
John, I have a
about.
point on the last bullet point.
She does it.
What we're really trying to do is reduce the carbon footprint per passenger is kind of the goal of the last bullet point. There are some other steps we could take. For instance, John McBride just sent out a thing about a plane. It's propeller-driven plane that is just so ergonomically designed that it uses about a third of the fuel of the other small planes. The one they're flying right now carries 6 people. They're designing one that would carry 10 people. So it might be kind of an air taxi kind of a thing that the carbon footprint per passenger would be way less than the jets that are flying now. But also an air taxi, if they fly in here and drop people off, and then they take off, they're deadheading going somewhere else, that just doubles the carbon footprint per passenger who just arrived. So there might be things we can do to minimize the amount of deadheading of the air taxi or the general aviation. So they're being more efficient on the flights that they are taking.
Yeah, so we can't, it's a difficult, in terms of the aircraft type and how they're used, we really get into difficult territory, to Greg's earlier point about mandating, with not being able to, unreasonably discriminate against a certain type or class of aircraft, and then getting into the business models. I will say, like the air taxi folks, I do think try and plan their logistics so they're doing as little deadheading as possible, because that's also a non-revenue producing, but it does happen. There's no doubt about it. And you increase the number of operations potentially coming in to the airport. But yeah, those are all, I think, the future is going to have some differences in terms of technologies that are emerging and that are more efficient and such, and that's where the pricing of the fuels and maybe how we can incentivize if we do have these types of aircraft coming in. How can we use our infrastructure, whether it be gate spaces at the terminal or working with our fixed-based operator, so that those are preferred experiences at the airport and not unreasonably discriminatory or unjustly discriminatory.
John, what I think I heard you say is that really we need to be ready when we're able to pivot. Technology or a new means of doing things comes, and the airport should be versatile enough to do that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Somewhere in some of the presentations we've heard and comments we've heard that, well, if you bring in a bigger aircraft from destination without a single stop, your cost per passenger and your fuel expense per passenger is lower, and that's better, right? It's kind of like the Costco model. You go to Costco because you can buy a truckload of toilet paper for a lot less money. And so you're saving money per roll of toilet paper. We're going to save energy per passenger. But what we end up with is a storage house full of toilet paper we got on sale, or we have a lot more people than we really thought we wanted to bring here because it's so cheap to bring them here in bulk. So pardon my analogy. I didn't mean to make the analogy seem,
Yeah.
I like it.
Probably two different things there. So the ability for non-stops in terms of greenhouse gas emissions has a lot more to do with eliminating landing takeoff cycles, because your highest burn is when you're landing and especially when you're taking off. So if you can
good point.
go longer and bring people in from a destination, reduce the landing takeoff cycle, that really works to reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions. So that's one piece. The other piece is, some of what you said, like it's kind of like a bus, right? A bus on its own does not get great gas mileage, right? But the reason that I'm with commercial, and that's why our future discussion about the number of gates and flex gate concept became really important in terms of how do you manage that growth piece, or what some have called the cruise ship tourism model. And so if you can, that is where that got managed. That's where the yes and came in on those.
Right. That seems to be the one place you can manage it.
Right.
Thanks.
So with those explanations, Greg had suggested approving all of these bullet points at the beginning. We've had some explanation. I think the only one where we said we needed to come back with some clarified language, if I'm tracking correctly, was the last bullet point, just to be more clear on what it is that we mean.
On what did he say?
On commercial. I'm sorry, and I'm on the last bullet point of, I'm on the emphasized public transport, aviation and ground as first choice solution. I'm sorry, I haven't gone to the next two, which is create financial incentives for things like landing fees. I'm going to do it one slide at a time, otherwise I get confused, if that's okay. on the thumbs. With the explanation that we've given, and we'll come back with clarifying language on the emphasizing public transport. Do we have agreement on these?
Yeah.
And thumbs? I just want to see thumbs. Okay. Thanks. I'll get to the last two. It's just so much easier if we can go through slide by slide while we're so far apart. So there's further dialogue and discussion, and we may have had these already in terms of create financial incentives through things like landing fees and fuel prices by allocating airport costs from excessive greenhouse gas emissions to the aircraft operations that create the costs. There really is a lot of work that needs to be done here, but this is really looking at, is there an opportunity for us to have a carbon fee? And so if we're, for example, building or investing in a solar farm as part of our goal to offset airport emissions, can we structure some of our fee not just around fuel flowage like it is now, but can we have some fees related to the greenhouse gas emissions that we're looking to offset with that infrastructure? This is one that will take work, but it was one that was important to the Vision Committee because, one, it placed the cost of the mitigation measures to those that we're producing, which would take some metrics to figure out, and also provided a mechanism to fund particularly on airport or local infrastructure for energy production.
So John, is that sort of when you're saying create financial incentives through things like landing fees and fuel prices, is that another way of saying instituting a carbon tax?
Yeah, I think that was a lot of the discussion. We didn't necessarily call it a carbon tax because of some of it carries some baggage in the discussion, so we wanted to talk about the concept more, but yeah, it's a similar kind of idea.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then that would be used to fund the, solar farms, solar panels, roof structures over parking lots that there's actually quite a bit of acreage out there that can be covered with solar panels, for example, or
because just I think it's been mentioned before, but any sort of mitigation fees that we collect at the airport need to then be utilized for the airport versus other parts of the community.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a gray area that we need to have more discussions if we're, for example, investing off airport, but it's to specifically address kind of emissions goals and such for on-airport production. That's one we got to spend a little bit more time fleshing out our ability to do that.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
Patty?
Yeah, I was just going to say, John, thanks for bringing it up, but flying into John Wayne Airport in Orange County, flying over the congestion of Newport Beach, they're using solar panels on almost every single parking structure, be it a school or a park or a hospital, and it's amazing that it's perfect. And plus here, if we were to do that, it also gives shelter from winter storms for people's cars when they can park in those shelters. It's a great way to put a solar farm on a rooftop, and then you don't have to worry about a solar farm on the ground and where you're going to put it and how you're going to maintain it. So it's a great way and a great opportunity for us out there. So I'm glad that you brought that up, John. Thank you.
So more questions, concerns here?
John, I had reservations about the solar, doing solar on the airport. Certainly, let's do it where it makes sense. And like what Patty just suggested over parking structure is perfect place. But the airport could locate a solar project down valley, still in Holy Cross territory, that would be maybe way more efficient, way more cost effective to put in, get the electricity produced somewhere else in the valley. Eagle County did that when they bought up almost, a huge amount of that solar project there by the old Carbondale landfill. They covered their electric production of almost all their buildings in one fell swoop doing that. So the airport should take advantage of that kind of opportunity if it presents itself. In the meantime, sure, let's develop. I'm all in favor of doing what we can on site, on rooftops especially. Kelly, and then Greg.
Sure, I think we should just generalize this a little bit and say that we should maximize our on-site renewable energy through installations on property, terminal, FBO, and other structures. Because, as we've built into our land use code, we might have opportunities for vertical wind turbines and things as well. And that the goal here is to produce as much as we can on site. And that's what I see anyway as the vision. So we should say that.
Generalize that. And that was certainly, I think, consistent, Kelly, with what we heard from the Vision Committee members, that they really wanted us to maximize our emissions efforts at the airport and not to go too far off site so that the community was benefiting as much.
Well, and I think by just saying maximizing our on-site renewable energy production, that also ties in our efforts to create our ecto grid in that area as well. So we're, we don't need to say that here, but that's what we're trying to do. Create as much as possible. It'll feed the airport, it could feed the other buildings in that ecto grid as yet to be determined.
Does that make sense to the rest of the board as an amendment?
Yeah, it's fine. It gives us other opportunities.
Steve?
Yeah, Greg?
So I want to clarify what I think I just heard, that clearly on-site is certainly the ambition. If the airport, for instance, theoretically were to acquire a piece of property across the highway, behind DABC or something like that, and put in a solar farm, if it was airport property, would that still qualify as?
Yeah. I'm gonna. Okay, this is farther away than I thought. Sorry.
Well, that was the first question. The second one is on the same chart back there. we've talked about voluntary. We've been actually instituted voluntary carbon fees, which, you know, have a very low uptake, even when they're doing their best. We're not considering both in that. I guess we could be considering both in that phrase, but what we're talking about here are actual fees that are put in across the board. We're not talking about voluntary programs.
Well, I think it's going to be a yes and
For inclusive
well,
voluntary
but for the
programs.
project, we're not relying on the voluntary. It's really about the on-site. And I want to point out, and I know you all have seen this, we do own property across the highway. The airport does right now. You see that outline, these two red areas. We had initially, through the Vision Committee, reserved space on that side of the highway for solar farm. We had looked at, just like Patty, you saw in California, these parking structures we felt were all primed for covered solar parking. Even if we do it incrementally as we develop, get all the conduits in and get everything ready to go so we can continue to add solar. Then you have the facilities that are up for redevelopment. We have seen some airports, for example, in Chattanooga, where they were able to build solar farms actually fairly adjacent, you know, outside of the object-free areas, of course, to the runway with no glare kind of infrastructure and such. So there may be some opportunities to look at even more. But Rich, I don't have this right in front of me now, but I want to say we've identified 4 to 5 acres of space right now on site that's readily available for solar.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I'm just going to scroll back this way. I just wanted to give you that context. So Greg, that would be the on-site. And then Steve, to go beyond that, and whether it's to meet a net zero goal or to whether to begin to offset aircraft emissions, that would be off-site kind of infrastructure at that point. So
Another
Kelly,
thought.
sorry.
Just one other last thought on that. If we do get electric airplanes in the future that be like Tesla's needing a charging station to charge their batteries, that might be something in the future, in which case we'd need a lot more electricity than we're even anticipating now. And I think we're going to have to look elsewhere for that electricity, probably.
And we're starting to get some information just based on what's happening with battery technologies and such now. And some of that may just be anticipating it with conduit and such, so that infrastructure can be easily run in the future as that technology comes available. So Kelly had a recommendation for change to kind of broaden, I think, the language around, you know, as much on-site energy production as possible. With that change, is the board good with this as a vision? Is that a vision statement? Yeah. Not seeing many thumbs, or do we need some more discussion around it? Okay. My thumb doesn't count, by the way. I'm just doing.
You're just showing us how to do it. Thank you. If I could, I just wanted to say, you know, I love it, the idea of doing as much as possible. But does that bite us going down the road where we have an aesthetic decision? We say, well, we can't make the aesthetic decision and leave a piece of open space here because this is what we're known for, because we're mandated to put in a solar farm. as much as I love solar, I think I'd have a problem with that. So I think we have to have a design aesthetic in place along with this aspiration to create as much on-site as possible. It has to be really smart design, because we could fill the valley with solar panels to meet a goal, but we might be killing the golden goose as we do it. So I want to make sure we're not being too zealous and eliminating what we're trying to protect here as well.
And
Kelly didn't mean that, and didn't mean to do that, I'm sure. So it came into my head.
to your comments, Greg, I mean, there are other options besides solar panels, the technology. There's solar tiles, right, for roofing. So there's ways to address those concerns and not have it affect our view planes and things like that.
We get to define what maximizes, I suppose, in the design.
That's really going to happen. Yeah, once you get into design, I think, Greg, you're going to be faced exactly with the types of questions you're raising, which is, what's the visual impact of this? You know, is this the highest and best use of this land? Is this what we want to see as we're coming up Highway 82 on the left-hand side? And you're going to have to make those choices. This document, and what's important about this discussion is this document's supposed to be giving you kind of a guidepost. Hey, we said we wanted to end up here, and so are these our priorities? So this is definitely, this doesn't mandate. This is a vision document, but hopefully it strongly directs you and future boards as you go through a project.
Could I make a suggestion in that light, then, that rather than insisting that it be on site, which is very specific, could we say it's within the immediate community? So we're not trying to export a solar farm to another county, for instance, or far, far away, but we may decide,
They offer a friendly amendment. Maybe we say
Okay.
optimize instead of maximize.
that may do it.
John, one other thought. I'm thinking of ground-assisted heat pump sort of thing for heating and cooling the terminal and the FBO building and everything. We have all the space between the taxiway and the runway on either side that is land that we could install an enormous system of piping to use ground heat-assisted heat pump system. Using that space. So that's a different technology that I think we ought to consider anyhow.
I think that was the intention with the geothermal.
George?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, Rich, I'm hoping you caught all of these language changes.
I'm getting them. GR and I are typing as you're talking, so.
Good. So we really have the optimize on-site, and really what we're doing is prioritizing on-site, in community, out of community kind of renewable sources, you know, as we have to implement. Is that a fair kind of summary of what I'm hearing from everyone?
Yeah, and just a quick comment I should have made earlier. That really follows our new energy code through ComDev, right? In terms of how to look at our built environment. It's on-site first, and then it's off-site, and then last it's mitigate. So this really follows our climate action plan, basically.
Yeah, why didn't you say that 20 minutes ago, George?
That's perfect. I just want to make sure that if we had an opportunity to do it off-site, but the airport could buy it and it would qualify as on-site mitigation, that thus we could use the funds or apply the carbon fees, we could do that on airport-owned property.
So with that, so we'll make some amendments, or these this is agreeable. So we're following kind of our, just looking for thumbs. I saw Greg, Steve's. Okay. All right. I know this is laborious, but thank you for going through it. I think these are important conversations. Seamless ground connectivity. Seamless ground connectivity. Rich, can I pivot to you? Because I think these are a lot of recommendations from the focus group, actually.
Yeah, sure, John. I'd be happy to walk the board through this. Again, keeping in mind these are aspirational goals. The Vision Committee had asked the focus group to really concentrate on kind of the ground connectivity, but it was with the caveat that to not look to solve the entrance to Aspen issue. Again, it was more focused kind of on the airport itself, looking down valley and up to Snowmass. So in essence, their overall recommendations were to increase the utilization of RAFTA. Again, a high recognition that RAFTA is such an asset, but what we could do to continue to try to build on that. Again, there are challenges with luggage and the type of buses that they have, and that was recognized. Provide the internal and external wayfindings for transportation modes. So when we were talking earlier about, as a first choice, opportunities of walking through the new terminal, seeing signage that would maybe even have times set up that would say if you take public transportation through the dedicated route, you can get there in 2 minutes versus sitting in a car waiting for 25 minutes to get into town. So it's just using technology that would talk about that. You all seem to agree with those two. As far as the others go, the infrastructure to encourage electric ground transportation. I think we've talked about that a lot, that we want to just make sure that we're looking ahead and providing any of the infrastructure we need to anticipate the future. And then encourage multi-passenger ride-sharing opportunities, hotel shuttles. These transportation network companies, that's what the TNC stands for, and it's like ride-hailing, so you get your Uber and Lyft, and reducing the reliance, again, on single occupancy vehicle trips. And to the point earlier when Patty talked about Greg's wife driving to the airport, there was a recognition that we cannot just force everybody to do this, that there's gonna be people that just want to take their car to the airport and park in a parking lot. So those were the ones that you all, at least 4 of the 5 agreed upon. Didn't know if there were any questions on those 4.
Steve?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have been asking for a while now, years, if we could do a RAFTA time board in there for the RAFTA pickup. Because when I go out there and want to it's hard for me to take the bus if I have an early flight because the bus doesn't run from my house early enough for me to get to the airport in time. But the times that I have and I ride the bus home, it would be really helpful if I could look up there and say, oh, I've got 3 minutes, I better hurry, or oh, I just missed it. I'm not going to go sit out there in the cold and wait, because that gets very discouraging from wanting to do it again. Yeah. So if we could do something in the interior of the baggage claim, that would be great, because it might incentivize a lot of people to go, oh, the bus is coming in 10 minutes, I can walk out there and catch it to town. Yeah. Rather than the one time you go out there and the bus drives by you and you're there for half an hour, and you'll never do it again if it's cold enough. Yeah. So that would be great.
I remember that request, and I thought there was an effort that was underway to do that, but let me check on that.
No big hurry, but.
No, let me check on it.
Yeah,
it's a good move.
Thank you.
So the ones that desired a further dialogue and consideration was developing an airport-specific circulator with luggage capacity connecting to Ruby Park and Brush Creek. Again, that's if the airport has the opportunity to afford to do something like that, or if we work with the local businesses, private sector, to try to create something that would just be a specific airport circulator that would drop people off with their luggage at different locations. So that was just a thought, and that's what that was actually pointing to.
Rich?
Yes.
Rich, that was one that I disagreed with. The part I disagreed with it was connecting to Ruby Park. And if you have people with their luggage, they need to go right to their hotels or wherever they're going would be more ideal than taking them all to Ruby Park, unload all their luggage there, and then then they got to get a taxi or somehow get to their hotel. So I think having that be flexible on getting them to where they really need to go with their luggage would be the ideal.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think there was, the next point down is improving the baggage transport options, and that was a lot of discussion with the local hotels. But again, it's trying to figure out a way to get the luggage to the locations is really one of the challenges. It's aspirational again, and I believe working with the local private sector, we could figure that out.
Kelly?
Steve's comment raises a question for me. Is the circulator assumed to have 3 stops, or was there dialogue about intermittent stops between the 3?
Well, again, I think it was more of a connection of the 3 tying to public transportation. I think that's where they were, because that's where your buses are at. So that was, I think, is where we were trying to tie those. At least that was the discussion there. Ruby Park, I'm trying to think why Ruby Park was part of that, unless it was just more of a downtown location, easier for kind of a central location.
There's a lot of hotels right there.
Yeah.
I had one other thought. At one point, I was thinking that the airport shuttle thing would be just use the transit stop on Highway 82. But thinking about it, I think that we have to have the shuttles have to go right into the airport. It's going to be a separate shuttle system, I think, to really get people to use it. You can't ask people to be going out to the bus stop on Highway 82 with their luggage and standing there waiting for a bus to come along, when they could be waiting in the terminal, walk out the door, get on a bus right there at the terminal.
Yeah, Stephen, I think that's, on that last one, is exploring the connections. I think in the design, when it gets into that, is getting the transportation in as close as you can to the terminal to make it convenient. Any other questions or clarification? The airport circulator, again, I think, to Kelly, to your point, it would have to be certainly fleshed out. What would be the most appropriate location for stopping, how that would actually work. But, the thought was, if it's something that the airport would, or the private sector, we work with the private sector in developing some type of circulator system. It's just aspirational, and if it's something that we could put in, at least get the direction from the board, it's something to at least consider.
I guess on that one, I would say sure, it'd be worth taking a look at it. I worry that we may not have the volume or the scheduling to have an actual circulator going around 24/7. That doesn't make sense. We don't have that much air traffic, commercial air traffic in particular. General, that's an interesting question, but a continuous circulator might be empty a lot of the time. Just wondering what kind of size population you need for something like that to become efficient. But still, it's worth looking at. I don't want to take any ideas off the table.
Short?
Yeah, I would just say, as has been stated prior, these are all just aspirational. The idea that explore aerial or rail connections, I mean, that is really aspirational, but it should be in there for the future. So I don't think we have to delve into the details on these.
I think Kelly's trying to get in there, Steve.
Oh, Kelly, sorry, sometimes I'm looking at John's screen on the slide. I'm not looking at your picture, so
No.
you guys are just gonna.
And I just want to note, this last bullet, explore aerial and rail connections. I don't want to take anything off the table, but I do want to just question the viability of that, because my concern here is are we talking about this just in terms of the CDOT right away, how we've sort of, memorialized that in our comprehensive valley transportation plan, or are we really looking at airport property for this? I just have a concern when we're talking about the common ground recommendation, layout plan, and how that shifted things and pinched, area on the east side. So is that, like, when we say we're going to keep space for them, or we envision we're going to keep space for them, are we saying that with sincere intent? Is that really a viable option?
So Rich can speak to the focus group conversation. I think in the vision committee, there was recognition that aerial or rail connection is not fully within, it's just partially within the airport's kind of purview to implement. That it really is a conversation that would have to be concluded with the community, the city of Aspen, the board, the EOTC conversation. And so the real effort was to be able to reserve space so that if those connections came to fruition in the future, that any development we do at the airport doesn't preclude a rail stop or an aerial connection. There is that, Kelly, as you recall, I think the reservation of right-of-way, CDOT for, at the time it was, I think, being considered for rail. And so it's really about preserving that, as well as preserving some space for whatever would need to be developed so that could connect to the airport. And I do think that's feasible. That's within that layout plan.
Yeah, and that's similar to the focus group discussion as well. And the space reservation was on the design in the parking area or the terminal. Some space reservation there that makes the circulation for the public transportation work with what John just talked about with the right-of-way.
Is that what you're getting at, Kelly?
Yeah, I want to be aspirational, but I want to be honest too. So that's, it just helps me understand, like, really, are we putting something in there that we're actually never going to pursue and there's never going to be room for it, or is this, is this a legitimate conclusion?
I do think it's legitimate, but it would be it's going to have to be carefully designed because it could easily be designed with infrastructure that would preclude it, because that is a tight space in there.
Yep.
Steve, maybe we should reword that. I mean, maintaining future space for even looking at for RAFTA, for different modes. Maybe make it a little more generic. I think it's a little. I agree with Kelly. It's a little. Well, it's more than a little unrealistic that you're going to get aerial rail connections, certainly up to Snowmass. It's never going to happen. And from our transportation, Upper Valley transportation study, when we looked at routes even from the intercept lot to town, which would have stopped at the airport, that was well beyond our financial capabilities for our community. So I think it's important to maintain future space for multimodal transit systems. Maybe make it a little broader and not even throw out the specifics of an aerial rail connection, because I just don't see it. I don't see it financially, I don't see it visually, I don't see it route-wise.
Well, maybe as Kelly said, we referenced that CDOT piece that we're trying to maintain with some space reservation for future connectivity to the terminal, and then reference the multimodal. So that's broader. Is that where both of you are going?
It makes sense to me.
Kelly, is that kind of where you were going to?
Honestly, I just think I don't have the richness of background on this subject. That's why I wanted to pose the question and just be honest, upfront
Sure.
about it and what we should do. So I'm sort of happy to rely on other input.
I mean, John, we could reference not only CDOT, but we could reference the Upper Transportation Mobility Study as well.
Yeah.
Because that talks about the airport specifically, and just keep it broader. I just, the way this is worded, it just,
Okay.
That's my suggestion.
So just going back to the rest of the board, does that change to the last bullet point? And I can tell we're all getting a little tired now. It's getting to be a long day. That changed to the last bullet point to really reference the CDOT right-of-way piece, the connectivity to the airport, and really talk about more of the multimodal transportation and Upper Valley transportation plan connectivity. Is that an amendment that is acceptable to everyone? Yeah. Did I capture that, George?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I just wanted to check in on all of these. Now we've had some questions, some amendments, and then some reference that we're going to need to rely on future design to flesh some of these issues out. With those changes and clarifications, are we ready to move on from this? Is this a thumbs up on this slide, or do we have more that we need to discuss?
John, on a lot of this, I mean, I'm happy where we are now, and I really need to see our rewrites and then take another look at it just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
And we're going to bring all those back. We're actually, we could go back to the previous slide. You'll see that, really GR and Rich have been trying to capture those, but I just wanted to get through everything and then go through the rewrites at once.
I have a question, a process question. I don't know,
Patty.
is P&Z coming in? Do we know? We're supposed to.
I was just going to talk about that, Patty, because I think we're hitting about quarter of. So P&Z is going to start in 15 minutes. We've just finished the slide, so we can pick this up. And we'll schedule. Do these 2-hour blocks work? Do we want to go for more? It's pretty laborious, so I can understand that not wanting to do it for 3 or 4 hours.
Can you John, can you tell us what's left that how much more we have to look at?
Well,
It's quite a bit. Yeah, so we've got
4 or 5.
We've really got 7 more slides to get through, George. So we're getting, I think we're getting close on the recommendations. Then we have some information for you on what phasing could look like. I think to our earlier discussion, that phasing may turn out to be different, but I'm not sure the timing, overall timing of the project will. But I suggest we probably have another hour and a half.
And the next one's a
Oh,
big
that's not
one.
bad.
Would
So
you mind
maybe
putting up
they-
the slide that shows the green and yellow and pink? Yeah, that one.
This one?
There you go. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. So we just finished seamless ground connectivity. Oh, I see where you're going. So we've got it's really 7 and then how that relates on the map, the airport layout plan.
So if you're guessing, John, based on our last 2 meetings, that we maybe only have an hour and a half left, which is probably too short. I would suggest maybe blocking out 2.5 hours. Give us an extra half hour.
Yeah, I agree, George. I
And that
agree.
was just to get through these slides, and then we've got to go back through all the language changes. So yeah, it will take longer. We may have a couple more work sessions ahead of us.
Yeah.
So that's okay. I think you guys are working through it. And this is laborious. I really appreciate the focus and going through the detail. And with that, Steve, I think this may be a good place for us to stop today. Unless the board wants to try and get 2 minutes in. I don't think we'll get through another slide today.
One.
I think Bridget and Aloysius agree. I'm going with the kids on this one, guys.
So, Steve, the next date would be September 8th is what we've got blocked out, starting at 10, and right now it's blocked out 10 to 12. Are we wanting to start earlier or go into the lunch? What are your thoughts?
What's the rest of the day look like?
That, I'm not sure. Steve dropped off.
He did? That makes a difference in,
What is your future?
because we can't, do this all in the morning and then have a huge afternoon behind, after. So it was the 8th?
Yeah.
10 to 12 works for me, if we need to do that.
Yeah, we're trying to see if we can stretch it. Right now,
September 8th does not look very heavy.
no, so should we start at 9:30?
Sure, let's go. Fine with me.
I'll have to change another meeting, but I could do that.
Yeah, because we have a light day that day, but just don't
Okay.
stack it now.
We will do our best.
That's
not
just
to.
next Tuesday. isn't it?
Yes, it is. These are Tuesdays, yeah.
I think we did just stack it, actually. So.
Okay, so I'm hearing 9:30, start time on the 8th. There's Steve.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll still just offer, I don't think we're gonna be ready for first reading on the 9th. Okay. Because we've taken 4 hours
Oh,
to get
jeepers.
halfway through the easy stuff, or, more mutually agreed upon things. But I think we'll need to shift that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I think John had hit on that earlier, that you guys need to really be settled in before we put this on the first reading, because it's going to be a resolution, so it needs to be pretty solid. So it was just a placeholder, and those are Wednesdays, actually, so we'll just probably pull those off, unless, again, I don't know how you're going to get there after the 8th yet, so we can go to another Tuesday after your 8th meeting, and then see if we're getting closer, then set a date.
So I'm sorry, my internet got unstable and dropped me off. I think it's really important that we spend the time in these work sessions and go through each item like we are, even if it's laborious and it's taking twice as long as we thought it might. But I think before going to some kind of a resolution, this is what we need to do.
So Steve, we extended next Tuesday's work session by a half an hour. We're gonna start at 9:30 to noon. Give us an extra half an hour to do airport. Okay?
Okay. Okay, and John, if you could send out an email with the sections, kind of the order of the rest of the stuff, so if all of us kind of look at it ahead of time, maybe we can have our points we want to make identified, and you know, might make it more a little more.
I already have mine.
We lost you, Steve.
Yeah, I think we lost Steve, but I think what he's looking for is the sections that we're going to go through for the next meeting. So we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, so are we done?
Yeah,
I'll text Steve that we're done.
Yeah, so Kelly, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Vice Chair
To
Kelly.
adjourn this meeting, so, yeah, I'm just gonna step in and say goodnight, everybody, and, thank you for all your hard work, and thank you, Grassroots, and everyone stay safe and healthy. We'll talk to
Okay.
you next week.
Have fun, Kelly.
Thank you.